네, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone joining us at the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications. Despite your busy schedules, thank you for joining us online and offline. I am the MC of today's event. My name is Kim Kyung-mi. It's a pleasure to be here. This conference is being held under the theme of Inter-Korean Cooperative Exchanges in Broadcasting and Communications by National Consensus. We have invited the experts on the Korean Peninsula and broadcasting and communications, as well as the youth, to look for the direction for cooperation in the field of broadcasting and communications, and also to provide a fresh perspective on North Korean broadcasting. This is being sponsored by the KCC and hosted by KISDI. In the first session, there will be 3 presentations, and also there will be a roundtable discussion with 5 people participating, and it will be on the unification of Korean Peninsula from the perspective of the MZ generation. At the very end, there will also be a panel discussion with 5 people participating, including the presenters of session 1. There will be many informative views exchanged here, so please join us until the very end. Also, this event is being aired through the KISDI YouTube channel, and Korean and English will be provided. Interpretation will be provided, so please join us until the very end. Let us now commence the opening ceremony of the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications. First off, I would like to invite President Kwon Ho-yeol of KISDI, who will deliver the opening remarks. Please greet him with a big round of applause.
네, 여러분 따뜻한 박수로
Please welcome him with a big hand. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kwon Ho-yeol, President of KISDI, or Korea Information Society Development Institute. It's a great pleasure to meet you all. KISDI is delighted to host the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications, sponsored by Korea Communications Commission under the theme Inter-Korean Cooperative Exchanges in Broadcasting and Communications by National Consensus. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Chairman Kim Hyun of Committee for the Promotion of Inter-Korean Exchanges in Broadcasting and Communications of KCC, who will be delivering his video message despite his very busy schedule due to the state audit. And Managing Director Kim Hyun-kyung of the Unification Broadcasting Research Center at MBC, Professor Ha Sing-yi of Dongguk University, Team Leader Lee Chan-soo from SK Telecom, and speakers, including Mr. Min Jae-myung, CEO of Eunungjeongni Brewery, who will discuss the perception of unification of the MZ generation during the panel discussion. And furthermore, to all the participants, both home and abroad, here with us, coming from their interest in inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation. Thank you very much for coming and joining us, and I would like to welcome you all. The world did face a crisis of closing borders and severance of all physical exchanges due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But the world also experienced new connections through new media in the online space. Inter-Korean relations also have not escaped from a stalemate since the breakdown of the 2019 US-North Korea summit. But the experience of new connections gives hope that inter-Korean relations can be reconnected in a new space, in a new way, in the coming generations. Broadcasting and communications will serve as an effective communication channel to enhance mutual understanding between the North and South. And broadcasting and communications will play an important role in having the people and the international community empathize with us and forming a friendly atmosphere between the two Koreas. In that aspect, I hope the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting Communications held today serves as a venue to draw on a new future of inter-Korean cooperation that the South and North empathize with one another, along with the international community, in the realm of broadcasting and communications, and also a venue to share insightful information and experiences with the participants. I would like to express my gratitude to the experts from various fields here today with us. All of the speakers and panelists, thank you very much. I do have high expectations for your insightful implications, and I hope you share your invaluable experiences with us today. And my thanks also go to Executive Director Ko Sung-won of KISDI and all staff who enabled today's conference to take place. And I wish you all good health, happiness, and the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We just heard from President Kwon Ho-yeol of KISDI. He also expresses gratitude to all of those joining us today. The role of broadcasting and communications, and also inter-Korean exchanges, and also global cooperation is also a role of broadcasting and communications field, as was mentioned by the president of KISDI. Next, I would like to invite Chairman Kim Hyun of the Committee of the Promotion of Inter-Korean Exchanges in Broadcasting and Communications of KCC. However, because there is a National Assembly audit being held, she was not able to make it here in person, but she did send a video message, so let us look at the screen. Good morning. Promoting the happiness of the people through media. I am Chairman Kim Hyun of the Committee for the Promotion of Inter-Korean Exchanges in Broadcasting and Communications of KCC. I would like to extend a sincere welcome to everyone participating in the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communication, which marks its 8th anniversary this year. I would like to express my gratitude to all the experts from home and abroad, and the speakers and all those taking part online and offline despite your busy schedules. In particular, I would like to express my gratitude to President Kwon Ho-yeol of KISDI. I apologize for not being able to join you in person due to the National Assembly audit of this year of the Broadcasting and Communications Committee. Broadcasting communication delivers information and culture and serves as a key infrastructure that enables communication and deepen understanding among people. By using broadcasting and communication as a medium, we will be able to restore the homogeneity between South and North Korea and strengthen the unity of the nation, thereby promoting peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. The theme of today's conference is Inter-Korean Cooperative Exchanges in Broadcasting Communications by National Consensus. North Korea's YouTube, the use of external propaganda media, the conditions and implications of producing North Korean-related broadcasting contents in Korea, seen through the case of MBC Unification Observatory, information and trends in North Korea, a new communication cooperation model, and the unification of the Korean Peninsula from the perspective of the MZ generation will be discussed. I hope that there will be an in-depth discussion on ways to promote cooperation, exchanges, and broadcasting and communication between the two Koreas that can be embraced by all generations. The KCC will also do its utmost to listen to diverse views and reflect them into policies. I thank everyone who have contributed to the hosting of this event and everyone joining us today. Finally, I wish you all the best of luck and good health. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. A big round of applause. We have just heard from Chairman Kim Hyun. She mentioned how she regrets not being able to be here, but she congratulated the event and also promised to reflect the views exchanged today into policy measures. Thank you very much.
네, 이것으로
This brings us to the end of the opening ceremony, and we'll go right into session 1. 3 speakers are ready to give us presentations. The very first presentation will be by Research Professor Ha Seung-hee from the Institute of North Korean Studies at Dongguk University. And the title of her presentation is The Study on the Use of YouTube Propaganda Media in North Korea. Please give her a big hand. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, I'm Ha Seung-hee from the Institute of North Korean Studies at Dongguk University. And today, I would like to talk about YouTube propaganda media in the North. Before I go into my presentation, I want to mention that in 2020, in North Korean Studies Journal, this paper was submitted, and I've added some additional recent trends to the presentation. Recently, North Korea's YouTube, their format, and very many changes have been observed, and I know that it has been receiving the limelight. And before I go into my talk, there is a caveat. As I was conducting this study and research, there is an area where it may be of a concern for me, because these accounts have not been disclosed as official North Korean accounts. And there are areas where the premise would be, or there would be an assumption that this is an account from North Korea. But of course, we cannot say for sure because there was no official acknowledgement from the regime. But I must say that there are many individual personal accounts. And if you look at Nodong Shinmun and other media outlets, they have never disclosed or acknowledged or admitted that they do run and operate these YouTube accounts. North Korea utilizes an intranet that does not connect them with the international community. And to have the residents of North Korea updating their daily lives on YouTube in such a circumstance does indicate that there are some interventions from the regime. So that would be the premise or assumption behind my presentation. So now, if I may begin in earnest, I would like to give you an overview on the YouTube channels of North Korea, some characteristics of the individual channels, and how it is being used by North Korea. And last but not least, I would like to go into some of the implications that we can draw from this status and what we can forecast or prospect for the future. So first of all, let me go into the YouTube channels that exist in the North. YouTube is a global video sharing website run by Google, launched on 2005. North Korea is assumed to have started their inroads into YouTube to upload news highlights. We have Uri Minjokiri or DPRK Today and Red Star TV, where they've utilized the channels to upload propaganda onto the account. However, there was a lot of interest shed on North Korea YouTube, starting off with vlogs and YouTubers. It was October 12, 2019. Through new DPRK, we've been seeing the rise of vlog YouTubers from the North. So this indicates that there may be a change in the strategies of North Korea's propaganda media. We do believe that North Korea recognized the need to use YouTube, this free of charge platform, to shift to this platform because it does have low entry barrier, and we believe that it's using this media outlet for propaganda. And not only that, there are all sorts of internet and social media platforms. Not only YouTube, but we also have SoundCloud, a music sharing platform. We also have Instagram, Facebook, and other social media outlets. And we're seeing this more used by the North. So once again, we're observing a change in the propaganda strategy. And particularly, in Kim Jong-un's letter at the Second National Elementary Workers Conference, there was an indicative shift from the formalistic, obsolete schema and stiffness to that overcomes formalism and of which that can be described as creative. But as I've already mentioned, North Korea's use of the internet prohibits the access to YouTube, but we do see North Korean people themselves producing contents on their everyday life. So we can see that they have certain format contents and they make regular postings onto their YouTube account, and there is some consistency that we can draw from in the contents. Moving on to the channels that exist right now. Initially, we've been seeing news highlights. So we, as mentioned, from the DPRK today, we've been seeing these news highlights, and we also see channels that offer English subtitles or dubbed in English. And we have 삼지연. This is also a Joseon Central TV news highlight channel, but we've not been able to see recent updates. So here we have DPRK Korea and other propaganda media where such contents are uploaded here on this account. And then Echo of Truth. It's deleted right now on YouTube, but when it first started off, here it says that the account was created in 2017, but it was 2019 when they started to use Vlog. In October and November of 2019, they've utilized various channels to introduce this Vlog format. And as you all know, we have new DPRK. You may be familiar with this channel. And Sari Volin. This is an account by a girl that has a British accent. And it's been receiving the spotlight these days. They changed the account name to Sari Pak, but I think that it hasn't been reflected in this presentation, but there was a change in the account name most recently. If we look at the languages that are used in these channels, we have Korean or North Korean, where we've been seeing subtitles in Korean and English, but then afterwards we've been seeing specific languages being used, including Chinese and Russian. In other words, where they have targeted their viewership to particular language-speaking nations. This slide indicates the internet control policies of China and the North. China does not have access to YouTube. However, they do have a similar video sharing platform under the name of Bilibili or Bilibili. And the North also has an account under the name of New DPRK. And if we look at the editing of New DPRK's posting, we do see Chinese subtitles and Chinese editing, which leads to the notion that this may be for the Chinese viewership. And afterwards, this was also posted on YouTube, and we've been seeing English subtitles, and we can see that they post contents for the international community more so on YouTube. I've mentioned about 삼지연 and the Pyongyang broadcast service, and Echo of Truth that utilize the Vlog format, which is of course right now closed or deleted. And we also have Sari Park that changed their account. So here it's indicated as Sari Voline, but we also see these vlogs or vlog accounts on YouTube. And moving on to some of the characteristics. In the case of the news channels, it includes 삼지연 and Pyongyang broadcast service. And with regard to these two channels, it's mostly on news highlights, so we don't see that much of a change in the contents. However, if we look at the vlog channels, including New DPRK, Sari Volin, and Echo of Truth, we do see YouTubers emerging. In Echo of Truth, in many of the cases, they use English, and we do see an unknown North Korean speaking in English, and we also see a woman under the name of Chini that speaks Russian. In the case of New DPRK, initially there was a YouTuber under the name of Park Eun-sung that spoke Chinese initially, and Lee Soo-jin is a child YouTuber, and we also have another YouTuber, Woo Hyun, that speaks Chinese. In the case of Sari Volin, we have a child under the name of Songa that speaks English, and recently, amongst the accounts, especially it's a new account that was created this year, and we're seeing regular updates. So now let's move on to New DPRK. The first posting was on October 12, 2019 on YouTube. And on October 15, 2019, we also saw that very same content on the Chinese platform of Bilibili. The initial YouTube accounts and the contents initially just translated the thumbnail into English, and subtitles remained in Chinese. However, afterwards we've been seeing more translation of the contents, and we've been seeing also a deletion of Chinese subtitles to replace with English subtitles for the YouTube audience. So we can see that there is some editing in their contents depending on their targeted viewership or depending on the media outlet. So we can see that the contents on Bilibili for the Chinese people and the contents on YouTube also target different viewership, and depending on that, they edit the subtitles. We do have contents that are on Bilibili but not on YouTube, and in that case we do see Chinese interviews, the cases where the Chinese language is all the more emphasized. So for such content, it's not uploaded on YouTube. And through Sina Weibo and Chinese social media, we've been seeing a lot of communication on Bilibili. However, on YouTube, comments are disabled. So we have not been able to see a lot of interaction, and it's more so a one-sided type of contents being uploaded onto the channel. And on new DPRK, it's more so a vlog format where it introduces the everyday life of the North Koreans, tourist attractions, and cultural experiences. And if we look at the clips, and if we may categorize these clips, as of September 2022, there were a total of 112 posts, and most of the clips had to do with the everyday life of the YouTuber. In the case of the Eco of Truth, it's currently a blocked account, and let us go into the past footsteps of how it got deleted. In 2017, this account was created under the name of Eco DPRK, and then it changed its name to Eco of Truth. Initially, it was more so on promotional videos with English subtitles, but afterwards, we've been seeing various narrations in French as well as in Russian. In terms of the filming, the screen composition, transition, colors, fonts, sound effects were quite refined and sophisticated. We had key YouTubers speaking their respective languages, and in December 2020, the account was blocked. And then we've seen the re-emergence of this account based on the location indicated as South Korea. And there was this account under the name of Eco of Truth Returns. And eventually we found out that this was a pirate account, although the videos were restored. And there was regret expressed on Echo of Truth Returns account. And here, as you can see, right after the account being blocked, this individual has mentioned that this account and the purpose of this account was to correct the misconceptions about her homeland, and at least wanted to show the reality of the country and the lives of the ordinary North Koreans as it is, and the voice of the people like herself living in North Korea. But at the end of the day, this account was blocked and deleted. These are some screenshots of the contents on Echo of Truth, and you can see that there are all sorts of diverse formats, for instance, true or false, that try to find a way to lift any rumors or to respond to any hearsay on North Korea. And for Echo of Truth, we've been seeing more clips on the everyday life. And moving on to Sari Voling, a girl living, an 11-year-old girl living in Pyongyang that speaks English with a British accent, and you can see these contents sometimes with English subtitles, and it's trying to familiarize the viewers with the North. You can see that she uses a selfie stick or her mobile phone to take videos, which the purpose would be to show an individual, a member of the citizens that do take videos just like ordinary people. And then now moving on to how YouTube is being used in the north. In many of the cases, it's to pursue international tourists or tourism through multilingual contents. We can see that the contents have to do with introducing these tourist destinations or showing what life is like in the north. In the case of Bilibili, as mentioned, China does not have access to YouTube, so this Bilibili platform and the contents uploaded there by the north is to cater to the demands of the Chinese population. And the videos posted on Bilibili do put a lot of emphasis on, for instance, Kaesong Korea ginseng cosmetics or skincare in the north. And another point to note is that the North, for the first time, participated in the Vietnamese International Travel Market, or VITM, which indicates their ambition to expand their tourism business. And in 2019, October and November, they've introduced these tourism packages, some experiential videos. And we can see that the reason why they're utilizing this YouTube channel, one of the reasons would be to encourage and facilitate their tourism industry. And then moving on to vlog used to enforce the image as a typical country. So we believe that they want to reinforce this image as just your everyday, your normal country, that the North is not any different. We can see that we have Lee Soo-jin TV, and in the case of the Songa account, if you watch the contents, you can see they upload pictures of the past when they were young, when they were babies, which is to eliminate any suspicions of fabrication, to make sure that the viewers understand that these people are real, live citizens of the regime. And not only that, they use YouTube to indicate the lives of women, of children, and the persons with disabilities. And we can also see that they utilize various formats, including filming and editing techniques and design, and also in the font and screen transition. They utilize sophisticated technology. And if you look at the coloring, we can see that pastel colors are used extensively, sound effects. And in addition to North Korean music, they seem to utilize international music as well, which seems to be a change in their stance. In order to avoid the account being deleted, these are some of the tactics that they use. One has to do with the location, designating the location, and also disabling the comments. On YouTube, if I may first talk about indicating the location, the accounts are not indicated as a North Korean account. They're sometimes not designated, or the account is indicated as an account of South Korea or a third country, because this does help them from avoiding the account from being deleted. And when they do set the location at such country, it's true that there are contents of that country that would be shown more based on the algorithm. And we can see that this is one of the strategies that they have to avoid account deletion. So this is one strategy, to have the IP set at a different country. And in the case of disabling the comments on the Sari Volin account, all of the comments sections are disabled. And based on children's policy of YouTube, there was a change. And based on this children protection policy, the comments, if you want to have it disabled, the owner of the account can make that happen, can disable the comments. And we're not sure exactly how this was done, but there are various circumstances that we can take into account behind the disabled comments section, but we do believe that it's based on their strategy. And it seems that if we do want to understand the full picture, we also need to take note of the policies of the North. And now moving on to the conclusion. So we can see that there are some characteristics as a global platform that they're trying to utilize, and there is also a strategic component to this. They are using both two platforms, Bilibili of China and YouTube of the US, and it seems that they're taking full advantage of the new connections and the scalability that is possible on these platforms. Before the pandemic, international tourism was a key focus of their postings. However, due to the prolonged pandemic, we can see that their tourism business was struggling, and the YouTube channels seem to be utilized as a PR outlet to have their tourism business resume after the pandemic. And we can also see that they do have an intention to open their doors as they do seem to accept the new trends and formats of contents. And they do believe that there's a misunderstanding with regard to children's rights, women's rights, and with those with persons and the rights of the persons of disabilities. And it seems to react and to respond to their so-called misunderstandings towards them from the international community. And we can see that there will be more fragmentation and sophistication of YouTube accounts because they will try to avoid the deletion of the accounts. As mentioned, we cannot pinpoint that this was driven by the North Korean regime or by the government, but we can say that the account does help us better our understanding on the lives of those living in the north. So it can be a source of information or data, but once again with a caveat. We need to understand that this regime is a particular regime because we may end up hastily generalizing that this image, the video that we see, actually represents the lives of all people rather than to the just of the privileged or the privileged few. And by using YouTube as a propaganda media, we will be seeing more fragmentation and expansion of such contents. So we do need to understand this. And of course, even if they do have strategies, there will be limitations in deleting their accounts. So in other words, they will be engaging in a more fragmented approach. So irrespective of whether this account is authentic or not, we need to understand that with the flood of information and contents, we need to understand how we should respond going forward. Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation, Professor Han. She talked about the current status of YouTube channels in the North, the characteristics of these channels, and how the North is using these YouTube accounts, and how we should perceive the utilization of the YouTube channels. Thank you very much for sharing with us your insights.
Let's go on to the second presentation of session 1. And the speaker is Managing Director Kim Hyung-kyung of the Unification Broadcasting Research Center of MBC, and she will give a presentation on the current status and task of producing North Korean-related broadcasting contents in South Korea. She is on stage. Please greet her with a big hand. Yes, I understand that I am given 20 minutes, so I will give my presentation during that given time. We have a program titled 통일 Observatory. 통일 means unification. And we would like to take a look at this program to look into the status and tasks of producing North Korean-related broadcasting contests in South Korea. KBS's window of North and South was launched 1 month before the Unification Observatory program. But the reason that we were selected to give a presentation was probably because starting from the very beginning, we have been deeply involved in the production of this program. And I actually have been deeply involved from the very beginning of creating this North Korean-related programs in South Korea. So because I have a lot of experience, which also means that I have had my share of trial and error. So I have a lot to share, and that is probably why I have been invited to this forum. The Unification Observatory, the 통일 Observatory, I think for the older generation will bring back memories. But there are some people who do not know that this program continues to be aired on TV. Those in their 40s or those near their 50s tend to tell me that, oh, I used to watch that program when I was doing my military service. This program was launched in 1989. It was on April 22nd of that year when the program was first aired. This program provides news related to North Korea and a variety of contents related to North Korea. So right now it airs from 7:20 a.m. to 8 a.m. on Saturday. So it's a 40-minute program, but actually there's about 36 minutes of contents being offered. We utilize video clips from North Korea Central TV, which is a very important source of information for us. Now we directly receive the images from North Korea Central TV, and from 9 o'clock in the morning and also at late in the night, we have programs that utilize these video clips. But in the past, actually, the related contents were aired in the afternoon. In North Korea, the North Korea Central TV is aired in the afternoon. And after COVID-19, the broadcasting of North Korea became a disaster-related special program broadcasting. And so that trend has continued in North Korea. And we could see that there are reruns also. But we take what has been aired in North Korea through North Korea Central TV, and we utilize such video clips. But not only that, we also utilize our own news coverage of North Korea. And I will explain about that. For example, this week, there was a launching of the North Korean missile. So there are these major issues for that week, and also there was a Politburo Central Committee meeting, which discussed several issues. And for the Hwanghae-namdo, 5,500 units of agricultural machinery were sent to this region by Kim Jong-un, which was heavily highlighted by the North Korean news. So this actually was a move to maintain the system that exists in North Korea, and it was highlighted by the news media in North Korea. So we cover that as well. We also cover information regarding North Korean language. For example, what was aired on September 24th of this year on Unification Observatory, the following were introduced. First of all, fashion in North Korea currently utilizes the North Korean flag. So there is a state-run factory that makes these clothing that utilizes the North Korean flag, and a lot of the children are shown on TV wearing these clothing with the North Korean flag design. This was introduced, and a new photo book of the Kim family has been published. This was also introduced. Not only that, North Korea's harvest and food situation was analyzed with satellite photos. There were analysis utilizing these photos, and also estimates of the current situation were given. And the young people of North Korea are quite sensitive, and they are interested in what's happening overseas outside of North Korea. So there was an in-depth diagnosis of the challenges or the problems of young people in North Korea. We invited experts and also North Korean defectors, and there was a dialogue on that topic. There was also the 20th anniversary of the July 4th communique, and celebrating this, there was a model inter-Korean talk by South Korean college students that was held. And because this is a program related to North Korean issues, we had introduced that mock conference for about 6 minutes. So as you can see, we have a variety of contents being introduced through this program. There are many different programs that are run by MBC and also by KBS, but there are only one or two that deals with North Korean issues. And I would like to talk about the background of how such programs came into being. This was because of the changing situation, such as the end of the Cold War. This was a fundamental change of our times. It was back in 1989 when KBS first launched its first program on North Korea, which was a window on North and South Korea. And then in April of the same year, 1 month later, we launched the Unification Observatory. This was because there was a move away from the Cold War, and also there was a hosting of the Seoul Olympic Games in 1988. So there was a change in the scenery and the situation. As you know, the 1988 Seoul Olympic Games was the first in 8 years that the communist side and the liberal democratic sides had joined together, and all sides participated. For example, during the 1984 LA Olympics, only the democratic countries participated, and before that, the democratic countries had boycotted the Olympics. But this was for the first time in 8 years that almost all nations around the globe participated in the Olympics. So this is Olympics known as the Olympics of Peace and the perestroika of the Soviet Union. In other words, opening the reform of the former Soviet Union, and also the changes in the systems of the communist countries of East Europe were taking place. So there was a thawing of the Cold War structure. And also, in the past, there was heavy control and censorship over the media in South Korea. But after the democratization movement in South Korea in the 60s, there was this yearning and call by the people for free flow of information and the freedom of expression and freedom of the media. So there was an open door policy that was implemented by President Roh at that time. And there was a special declaration for national self-esteem, unification, and prosperity. This is known as the July 7th Special Declaration. And this declaration came out based on the confidence that South Korea is more superior than North Korea in terms of the economy, politics, the system, and etc. So South Korea decided to open the doors and implemented this open door policy for North Korea economically, socially, and culturally with humanitarianism. And there was announcement of the policies of exchange. So after that, the North and South discussed about allowing each side to receive the broadcasting programs of the counterpart. In the past, North Korean TV images or news were known as rebellious documents and prohibited in the past before there was opening to the public. But this was changed with the new policy, and there was a cease in the defaming radio broadcast targeting North Korea. There was also a proposal for exchange of journalists, and this came after that July 7th declaration, the special declaration for unification and prosperity. Also, the writings of writers who had gone to North Korea, who had defected to North Korea before the liberation period, were now allowed to be viewed by the public. Chung Ji-yong is a famous poet, but in the past, actually, this poet was not allowed to be mentioned. His full name was not mentioned. What he wrote, his work, could not be read by the public of South Korea. So the authors who defected to North Korea were not open to the public until this time because there was a prohibition on the publication of these authors. But such prohibition was lifted with the détente and also the wave of democratization that took place in South Korea. And so for the first time in South Korean history, although it was an edited version, the South Korean people were now able to watch the broadcasting contents made in North Korea in their households. So this was a dramatic change. The program started to air in 1989. And we did not have much of a choice at that time. from the viewpoint of MBC, because all we could use was actually the edited North Korean news and also the discussions related to North Korean affairs. But the images of North Korean people speaking, being directly delivered to the South Korean people, was actually something very new, very novel to South Koreans. And that was why there was so much interest by the South Korean people in such North Korean TV images. If I may recall, I believe that the only material that we have left was that of June 24th of 1989. And this was the data related to the viewership of the Unification Observatory. Back then, the viewer rating of Unification Observatory was 10.26%, despite being aired at midnight. This actually was a viewership of 55.56% of the entire viewers with televisions watching TV at that time, during that time slot. So there were sometimes the viewership going up to as high as 70%. In other words, people really had a high demand for information related to North Korea, and that's why this program seems so appealing to the South Korean public. In the early stages, how were the North Korean related programs produced? What were the conditions and limitations? So this is a scene of what was aired in 1992. So this is about 30 years ago. It's a scene from the Unification Observatory, and I served as an anchor for the show from the late 1990s. Right now, I'm responsible for the overall production process of this program. But the biggest challenge at that time was that we are utilizing the TV images from North Korea, but back then, in the initial stages, we could not directly receive the images. So in Kaesong, there were broadcasting targeting South Korea. So if you were near the DMC, you could actually see the images, but it was not allowed for the broadcasting companies to directly receive the images. And back then, there was a monopolization. There was an agency of the government that had the authority to collect, evaluate, and distribute all of the North Korean TV images. And so this agency had reviewed, screened, and edited the North Korean TV images and distributed to the broadcasting companies once a week the images of North Korea that were taken from the North Korean TV programs. Most were about the North Korean regime, the North Korean system. They tried to show the reality of North Korea, its political and economic system. What you see here is there is a DVD and also a record here. We don't have the material that we received, but actually starting, I do believe that until around 2008, we had received the North Korean images through CDs. And this was provided to us by the National Intelligence Service of Korea. And there is a list of the contents. But before the CDs, we had the videotapes, the beta tapes or the VHS tapes that were utilized to deliver the North Korean broadcasting program edited versions to us, the broadcasting companies. So the initial objective of the programs introducing North Korea was to strengthen the homogeneity between the two Koreas. But in fact, there was criticism that the program actually was restricted to showcase only a confrontational viewpoint, and the sentiment of separation was reinforced by the programs. There was a difference between Korea and Germany because Before unification in Germany, the West German people could enjoy the TV programs of East Germany and vice versa. So, in the case of Germany, there was extensive experience of exchange and cooperation. Whereas, if you look at the Korean peninsula, all of a sudden, South Korea decided to implement an open door policy towards North Korea. But the national security laws, security state, conservative public sentiment served as obstacles for promoting exchanges and cooperation with North Korea. There was almost no experience of inter-Korean exchange and cooperation, and there was a confrontation between North and South Korea, and it was not possible to visit North Korea for news coverage. So these were the limitations for producing North Korean-related broadcasting contents, but nevertheless, we did carry on and produce the program related to North Korea. We tried various attempts. We had to overcome the limitation of having limited images or limited contents that we could utilize, because all of the contents that were provided to us was in line with South Korean national policy. So we had edited images provided to us in line with the national policy, but still the images and the contents were limited, and we could not go into North Korea for news coverage. And from the viewers' perspective, they were fascinated with the North Korean images at first. But after that initial stage, the people started to criticize the program, saying that every week the contents are the same. The viewers wanted diverse contents related to North Korea. They wanted some differentiated contents provided to them. Of course, we provided in-depth analysis about North Korea on different topics, but mainly it was the experts who came on TV and discussed the matters, but it was not that exciting for the viewers to watch. Also, we obtained broadcasting contents from overseas broadcasting companies, but those were only limited cases. And then we started to take on a new attempt utilizing the North Korean defectors. In the past, we had defectors who were military men who crossed the DMZ to come to South Korea. But in the late 1980s to early 1990s, there are people who came through East Europe or Russia or China. And so there were an increase in the number of North Korean defectors coming into South Korea. Their backgrounds were very diverse, and there were highly educated North Korean defectors coming into South Korea. So the broadcasting companies in South Korea started to invite them onto the programs to listen to diverse views from these people about North Korea and learn more about the different aspects of North Korean life. So MBC was a little bit more had more ability to utilize the different contents compared to the government-run KBS. So you can see here that there is Mr. Chun Cho-do, and also there is Mr. Chang Yong-chul. They are now businessmen. And also Ms. Kim Hye-young. She used to work as an actress in North Korea. So we started to work with them. In 1993, we started a corner titled The Unification Story of Cho-do and Yong-chul. And also, we had a female college student reporter who also joined in. And also here, there was a person who used to be a student at the Kimchek University of North Korea. He used to also study in East Europe. On the right, there is Chun Cho-do. On the left, there is Chang Yong-chul. And they were college students as well. You see them on a boat here, and they were traveling towards the Paltang Dam. We had them go out in this field to talk about for example, the power situation in North Korea. And this was a really fresh attempt that had not been tried out before. We were able to engage in different conversations about various aspects of North Korea. Up till then, there was not a lot of information or knowledge about North Korean society. And so these types of conversations related to North Korea was a really new attempt. And then EBS and other broadcasting companies started to utilize the North Korean defectors for their broadcasting contents. There were testimonies of the North Korean defectors, for example, utilized. And then in 1999, there was a change once again because North Korea started satellite TV broadcasting. And PICOM 3 satellite was utilized by North Korea for its satellite TV broadcasting. South Korea was also able to receive the satellite reception of the broadcasting companies of the North, and the South Korean government allowed this. So the South Korean broadcasting companies could install antennas and receive North Korean broadcasting and air them based on their autonomous independent judgment. This really increased the contents that we can utilize for our program. For example, the performances, the TV dramas of North Korea, and also the films, music, various contents were now provided to the South Korean broadcasting companies. And also, we were able to further strengthen news coverage. For example, news coverage of breaking news of North Korea. Not only that, we tried in-depth analysis and attempts to approach North Korea's sentiments, to understand them, and to better understand the internal situation of North Korea. We also had a feature on North Korea in film. I do believe that this was indeed a significant attempt. We tried to understand North Korea by looking into the films produced by North Korea. For example, the college entrance exams, and also mobilization, financial difficulties, the leisure activities, housing, education, health and culture, family life, romantic relationships, and etc. could be understood by watching the films of North Korea. So smoking, family, various relationships. As you can see, the mobilization, there are many different topics that were dealt with. And we were able to accumulate our experience of North Korean contents as well. And then the Inter-Korean Broadcasting Exchange took place with the start of the 1998 Mount Kumgang Tourism Project and the initial Inter-Korean Summit in 2000. So Inter-Korean broadcasting exchanges gained momentum, and we had journalists sent to North Korea, and North Korean journalists also had an opportunity to come to South Korea. And in March of 2001, I had a chance to go to North Korea for about 11 days. And this was created into a document, and it was introduced through the morning news, for example. It was titled Newswoman's 10 Nights and 11 Days in Pyongyang. Also, there was a Mount Kumgang Unification Forum on-the-spot recording celebrating the first anniversary of the June 15th Joint Declaration. At that time, Unification Observatory was a corner of the morning news, and what we did was we did a live broadcast for that entire corner of the Unification Observatory back then. And in the case of the 2007 Pyongyang reportage, we covered the site of Inter-Korean economic cooperation. We were able to meet with the workers there, the managers of the plants, and also we were able to meet with the economic representatives of South Korea who started to have their manufactured goods be produced in North Korea. North Korea at that time wanted to promote the fact that North Korea is changing, and that's why they were very active in terms of broadcasting exchanges. And then there was the forestry cooperation between the two Koreas, and so there was a Unification Observatory special program titled Dreaming of a Green Korea, which was aired in 2008. And then MBC also had a performance inviting the delegation of Taekwondo athletes, which was made into a program, a special program. But there were limitations because it is difficult to engage in open and free news coverage in North Korea. If we request to cover news of certain items or topics, only about 30% were allowed. And also there were bans that limited the news coverage and reporting. But we do believe that the experience of news coverage of North Korea can help us prepare for unification. Also, there's changes in the media environment. Today, there is so much information of North Korea. There's a lot of media, but the problem is that there is a flood of information about North Korea that has not been cross-checked. For example, there was a rumors of Kim Jong-un's illness or death, and this was fake news that spread throughout the world in 2020, not only in Korea, but also the news was spread throughout the world as main news in different countries. So now we need to make efforts to engage in cross-validation, fact checks, and reinforcement of expertise. So what we're doing these days is that we emphasize validation of the news sources. We check whether the source, the person, has the expertise to deliver such information about North Korea. And also, when selecting the source, we would look into their connection to particular issues, experiences, and credibility. We examine these areas to ensure that news and analysis close to the fact and truth can be provided. And also, experience of North Korea 10 years ago or 20 years ago are no longer very realistic portrayals of North Korea. So we need up-to-date information about North Korea. We also need fact checks of North Korea-related news. So last year, what we did was we had a symposium on coverage of North Korea, War on Fake News. And so on broadcasting and new media coverage, the symposium was introduced. Also, the resolution of the programs, the TV programs of North Korea has improved. And so we try to do detailed image analysis and cross-validation because of such upgrades. The limitations, well, it is difficult for us to not consider profitability or issues that would gain popularity or the interest of the public here in Korea. And also North Korea's reclusiveness and limited access to information are also limitations. There are restrictions to access to North Korean websites, as you know, and the South Korean government's control of North Korea-related information also remains. So, the challenges and the tasks for North Korea-related news and programs. As you know, there are so many different YouTubers that deal with North Korean contents. And now there is a competition for contents. Within such competition, we have to make sure that as a terrestrial broadcasting company with legitimacy and a long history, we have to compete with these various media producers and contents in this new media era. After the Kim Jong-un administration came into power and after the death of 캉Theme, I understand that there has been a lot of quotes about North Korea in the media and the news around the world. So there is a flood of North Korean information and news around the world. But South Korea understands the same language. We use the same language. We have a good understanding about North Korea. We have the experts and the expertise on North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. And I do believe that our contents has to be further internationalized, and we have to further strengthen the international influence of the contents that is produced here in Korea. We also have to think about resolving the ideological polarization and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Rather than confrontation between the two Koreas, we have to work towards promoting exchanges and cooperation, and we have to think about how we can better distribute information of high quality, and also how we can further discuss next generation's peaceful reunification. We have to find the directions to ensure this. I think that is where we are at. And this presentation and the other presentations, I do believe, deals or touches upon such topics, and I do hope that such topics will be discussed during the panel discussion. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. We just heard from Managing Director Kim Hyun-kyung. She talked about her experience of creating programs related to North Korea, and also she mentioned about the various exchanges in broadcasting of North Korea, and she also provided implications for working with North Korea in the field of broadcasting and communication in the future. Thank you for your insight. We will invite you during the discussion later on.
Yes, let us now move on. This is the last presentation for session 1. I would like to invite team leader Lee Chan-soo from the Growth Business Planning team at SK Telecom. The title of his presentation is The Gradual Dissemination of Information in the Lives of North Koreans and Telecommunication Cooperation Model between South and North Korea. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lee Chan-soo, team leader at SK Telecom. I would like to talk about what kind of telecommunications cooperation may be possible between the two Koreas and the dissemination of information in the North. In many cases in the past, we talked about how we can connect the wired network of both Koreas. Telecommunication in itself, I think, was a tool rather than it being the destination for inter-Korean cooperation. But what I want to talk about today is about the telecommunication services that are being used by the North Koreans, what kind of infrastructure exists, and how can we cooperate to enhance the sophistication of such infrastructure in the North. This is the order of my presentation. First, I would like to talk about North Korea's digitization centered on the 3G network, and then move on to give you some information on the communications infrastructure in the North as we see it. And then there are some considerations when we're thinking about cooperating with the North, so I'd like to talk about that, and last but not least, on the future direction in inter-Korean communications cooperation. So first, on North Korea's digitization. In 2002, 2G services were launched in the North. But in 2004, there was an explosion accident in Yongcheon Station, and information indicates that the cell phone was used to attempt to assassinate Kim Jong-il. So with that, all mobile communication services were severed for everyone. But the 3G services were launched in 2008 with Orascom of Egypt. Based on a brand under the name of Korea Link, this 3G service was launched. At that time, there were multiple outlooks, but because of the explosion accident and due to other circumstances, the service was thought to be provided to just a privileged few. However, you can see here on the right where we've been seeing an explosive penetration of subscribers. According to NK, we can see that mobile communication was used by the North to offer COVID-19 related information. And not only that, non-face-to-face or video conferencing relevant services were offered. Of course, I'm sure that there may have been limitations, but it's true that the mobile communication network was utilized by the North Korean citizens. So then let us now move on to the infrastructure of the North. We have many organizations, including the ICT Research Forum on the North, that have looked into this. So you can see the sources on the bottom. In the early 1990s, based on the support of UNDP, you can see that there was a fiber optic cable connecting Pyongyang and other major cities. So this served as the first backbone network. I mentioned that the 3G service was also launched, and if we look at the wireless network, we do know that it only services poor connection. There's a major difference or gap in the coverage if we compare the cities. In Pyongyang and Nasan, they have excellent quality. However, other regions cannot guarantee such a quality, and there may be many reasons behind that. And one has to do with electricity supply. And administratively speaking, if you want to build a base station, the government actually wanted to control the process. So the lack of coverage was an issue, and there were North Korean sanctions. In 2008, when 3G services were launched, there was a lot of obstacles and limitations in introducing the facility and the equipment, and there were a lot of attempts to find a way to circumvent all this. But at the end of the day, it was a situation where massive investments was impossible, and they were not able to stabilize or strengthen their network. I've mentioned about Korea Link, and then 캉SongNet was another telco that was introduced. And just as we have our 5G common network with Korea Link and 캉SongNet, we see that they do share their network coverage. And let us now move on to wireless internet communications. The North limits the use of internet, but they do have an intranet under the name of 광명 network, where major institutions, schools open up their website to offer ICT services. If you see on the right, this is the intranet or the future network that is used to support the internet users. Ever since the late 2010 and onwards, we've been seeing a lot of Wi-Fi connections in Pyongyang. So North Korean citizens, by using their smartphone, connects to the Wi-Fi network, and through this so-called future network, they can enjoy ICT services. And moving on to some of the points to consider when we want to cooperate with North Korea. Last year, North Korea submitted their SDG report to the UN. And if we look at the goal on development of friendly partnership, it indicates that they've enacted laws to enable all this. And in the area of IT, they have plans to modernize their telecommunications infrastructure and is willing to develop mobile communications for the next generation. So in other words, it's about enhancing the sophistication of their network based on economic growth. And we refer to that SDG report. It also indicates a lot of the economic and social problems that it is facing. So it admits all the challenges. And as a way to solve this, the North indicates science and technology and ICT as the tool to do that. First, if you look at food shortage situation, they aren't able to meet their food-related targets. But with science and technology, the report indicates that they are willing to solve this by using this technology. And then moving on to energy. Energy is their most urgent problem according to the SDG report that they have submitted. And they've set forth clean energy and clean fuel and technology to respond to this. And in terms of medical services, they do admit that they lack the resources, facilities, and equipment, but also their will to develop a long-distance medical service system to fill the gap. And in considering cooperation with the North, I think we also need to understand their will to vitalize their local economy. We do have their development plans based on the special economic zone. So this is not something new. It's been something that was with us for quite a long period of time. But if you look at North Korea's 5-year National Economic Development Plan, there's a focus on vitalizing the local economy and raising the quality of life for the local citizens. Not only that, this local economy facilitation strategy, we think, can be utilized in cooperating with the North. And there are some implications on the right. You can see that in situation where the central government cannot finance and due to sanctions, it's making them more difficult. So therefore, what the North is trying to do is engage in autonomous local development and vitalization of the local economy. And we believe that it is necessary to seek ways to take advantage of this policy as to galvanize the inter-Korean economic cooperation. And what they're trying to do right now is to attract overseas funding instead of governmental support to vitalize the local economy. Right now, they've closed their borders, but you can see that there is this determination to find a way to strike a balance amongst the regions by vitalizing the local economy. In terms of the way forward, there are three ways to look at this. First is on how we can improve the network infrastructure, but before that, there's something that has to be in place. It's about the special economic zones and how we can utilize that to connect the communications network between the two Koreas. So this could be a starting point in cooperation. And the second has to do with solving social problems based on ICT. In order to engage in communications cooperation, both Koreas need to have a consensus on social problems. Food and energy are common challenges, and we can use ICT to solve this, which will, of course, justify the fact that we need to cooperate in the communications front. And last but not least, the ultimate goal of such cooperation is to enhance the sophistication of the infrastructure in the north and to achieve a relationship based on mutual benefits. And let us now move on to cooperation that can be done amongst the cities. The needs between the two Koreas need to be met. And right now, there is no exchange ongoing between the two, but you can see that ICT is a key focus in cooperation for the north. So in Kaesong and Wonsan, there are some areas where we can cooperate, so we have to go into these zones first. If we look at Wonsan International Tourist District, they're focused on constructing hotels, buildings, and other waterworks infrastructure. But the North, with regard to telecommunications and financial services, have admitted that they do not have enough infrastructure to offer such advanced or modernized services as of yet. And it seems like they do not have a solution to this problem, but if we do find the right circumstance, we believe that a telecommunications infrastructure project can be keen for the North because it does help them boost their tourism business. And looking into the Kaesong Industrial District, it was very inconvenient for South Korean workers due to the inadequate communication environment. And right now, Kaesong is closed to outsiders, but with regard to Kaesong 2.0, North Korea is trying to shift their model from a labor-intensive one to that of focused on high tech. So smart factory and smart manufacturing can be a key cooperation agenda for the two Koreas to cooperate on. And with regard to the direction, the way forward in cooperation, it would be using ICT to solve social challenges. For sustainability, to make all of this sustainable, it's important to make sure to create value and solve the pending social issues. Electricity, food, and medical services are areas where North needs assistance, and let us see what kind of cooperation can be possible. Food shortage is a chronic issue, and they've been trying to introduce a scientific approach or smart farm solutions to nurture and cultivate greenhouse vegetables. So smart farm and smart livestock farming solutions are areas where the two can cooperate on. And then moving on to power shortage. Electricity output in the north is only 7.2% of the south, and they have dated facilities. But the issue here is that they need the power plants and they need the right transmission and distribution lines, and only then can we have the electricity sent to the load centers. However, they do not have such infrastructure for transmission and distribution. So one solution to solve this is not to build large-scale power plants, but to utilize distributed energy sources or renewable energy. So in this special economic zones, we may be able to build small-scale power plants and have a way to introduce renewable energy to increase the supply of power. And third has to do with medical services. North Korea has high-level medical staff. However, most of the medical sources are concentrated in the larger cities, which seems to go against social ideology because it's about equity. It's about everyone being able to enjoy medical services, but it doesn't seem to be the case in reality. So as a way to solve this, North is looking into a long-distance medical service system, which is similar to telemedicine. In other words, hospitals in the larger cities and hospitals in the localities will be connected via the network to enable consult amongst the physicians or the health professionals. However, in terms of infrastructure and software, it seems to have a lot of limitations. And if we think about the telecommunications network, you do need a backbone network, and yes, they do have that. But we also need the last mile network that connects the hospitals to the backbone network, which is lacking. And if we look at the software, in order to engage in consult, there's a lot of data, a back and forth of data transmissions. And you need standardized protocols to make all of this possible. However, this is also another area that's quite insufficient. So an upgrade in their healthcare network or PACS, a picture archiving communication system protocol, could be an area where the South and North can collaborate on. And in Pyongyang, if the circumstance allows us, we may be able to connect the healthcare professionals of the North and South to engage in joint healthcare and medical services. Lastly, if I may talk about what their ultimate destination, it's about modernizing the communications network of the North, and it's about switching from not wire but to wireless. In China and Myanmar, countries that were way behind have decided to skip the process to go right to mobile. And you can see that they've been able to successfully introduce such a network. My apologies. But if you look at North Korea, only with their internal capabilities, it would not be able to innovate their network infrastructure. So if the circumstances allow, I think that South Korea can be a critical partner. But in all aspects of cooperation, but especially if we think about telecommunications, we need technological transfer and we need facilities investment. But this all is hindered due to sanctions. So I think we need the right environment to enable all this. And communications cooperation also has to do with massive investments. So North Korea has the challenge to not only have the sanctions lifted, but also to have them recognized as a sincere member of the international community. And initially, you can see that connecting the network between the two Koreas can actually open up some further cooperation. So we believe that we do need a mid to long-term cooperation map or blueprint, starting off with telecommunications cooperation. Right now, the borders are closed, but I think that we need to take a phased approach in cooperating with the North. And that is all for me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Team leader Lee Chan-soo from SK Telecom gave the presentation. This is the last presentation of session 1, which was on the current status of the infrastructure in the North. And he also gave us some insights on how we should engage in cooperation going forward. Thank you very much for all 3 presentations. And this brings us to the end of session 1. We would like to take a short break. A 5-minute break, and then we'll move on to session 2 and panel discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin the roundtable at 3:30. Thank you.
네.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us now begin session 2 of the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications. Did you all enjoy your break? On YouTube, both in Korean and English, this conference is being broadcast live on KISDI YouTube channel. Thank you very much for your support and interest. We are trying to find a way to cooperate with the North in the area of broadcasting and communications, and we would like to go into how we can cooperate further. And at session 2, we are going to engage in a roundtable under the subtopic of MZ Generation's Awareness of Korea Unification. So let me now introduce you to the members of the roundtable. We have them on the stage right now. As moderator, we have Professor Kim Ji-na from the Department of Language and Diplomacy at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Thank you. And as the speaker for the roundtable, we have Assistant Professor Kim Sung-hee from the Department of Economics and Finance at Suwon University, and we have 3 panelists. We have Mr. Min Jae-myung, CEO of Euneujeong이 Brewery. Thank you. And we have Elodie Stanislas also joining us as panelists. And we have Peter Moody, PhD candidate from the Department of East Asian Language and Cultures at Columbia University. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to our moderator, Professor Kim Ji-na. Good afternoon. As introduced, I'm Kim Ji-na. And the topic for this roundtable is MZ Generation's Awareness of Korea Unification. Because this is a roundtable and because we're going to talk about the MZ generation, we can see that we have panelists with diverse backgrounds. And I would like to give you some more information on our panelists. So first, as our speaker, we have from the Department of Economics and Finance of Suwon University, we have Assistant Professor Kim Sung-hee. She was a postdoctoral fellow from the Department of Economics at Seoul National University. And we also have Mr. Kim Jae-myung, who is the CEO of Euneujeong이 Brewery or iBrewery, researcher at KAIST, and also has an ME in engineering at KAIST. And we also have Elodie Stanislas joining us. I'm sure that she may be familiar to some of the members of the audience because she's now joining the TV show Shooting Stars of SBS. And she has a bachelor degrees on performing arts, specialty in theater, also ethnology of performing arts master degree with honors, and was also the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics honorary ambassador. And last but not least, we have Mr. Peter Moody, currently a PhD candidate at Columbia University and is a visiting fellow at Seoul National University Asia Center. He was the adjunct professor at the University of Maryland at Baltimore County and research fellow at IFES. As mentioned, Professor Kim Sung-hee will be giving us a presentation which is on the MZ generation's awareness on Korea unification. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I am Kim Sung-hee from Suwon University. And today I would like to touch upon my research on the topic of Korean unification from the perspective of millennial and Z generations. So are the MZ generation different in terms of their perspective about unification is what I would like to talk about today. First, I would like to, however, look at the definition of the generation MZ. As you know, MZ generation refers to the millennials and the Generation Z. Millennials, according to the definition of the US, are known as the internet generations who began working during the economic recession in the late 2000s. Gen Z are known as iPhone generation who grew up communicating via mobile devices and social media. So starting from their teens, they have been well accustomed to utilizing these mobile gadgets. After World War II, there was a baby boomer generation from 46 to 1964. These are the baby boomer generations. And then the millennials start from 1981 to 1996. So those who are born during these years are known as as millennials, and then Gen Z are those who are born from 1997 to 2012. However, in Korea, the war ended a little bit later. So the Korean War ended in 1953. And the baby boomers came into being. And so, if we look at the generations of Korea, the categorization might be a little bit different. So, I utilize the categorization by Professor Cho Yong-tae of Seoul National University, who specializes in demographics. So, if you see here, you can see that the baby boomers, there's the first round and the second round. The first round are those who were born from 1955 to 1964, and the second round of baby boomers are those who have been born from 1965 to 1974, who are known as a 386 generation. And today, when I talk about the second round of baby boomers, I am referring to the 386 generation. So like I said, they were born from 1965 to 1974. And then Generation X are those who were born from 1975 to 1984. The millennials are those who were born from 1985 to 1996. And Gen Z are those who were born from 1997 to early 2010s. And the data that are utilized today, well, it would have been nice to distinguish millennials from the Gen Zs, but we wanted to distinguish the younger generation with the older generation, so I have categorized the two together and I refer to them as Gen MC. Now, you probably heard a lot about Gen MC. They want diversity. They're more open to diversity. They emphasize work-life balance. And also, they believe that the environment is very important. They emphasize ethical values. You probably heard a lot of these descriptions about the MZ generation. I am part of the millennials, and I think that half of the descriptions are right, half are wrong. But I think that the perspective of the different generations, when they look at the MZ generation, they tend to believe that the MZ generation stand out and they're different. So I want to take a look at the perspective of the MZ generation when it comes to unification of the Korean Peninsula. And the contents that I am dealing with today is based on the data from the Unification Perception Survey from 2007 to early 2022. Now you're looking at the graph on the necessity of reunification. So as you can see, there are different colors for the different generations, and also, you can see that as the years go by, their perception of the necessity of reunification has changed, and you can see the graph curve here. In the case of the Generation MC, you can see that compared to other generations, in all the years, their perception of the necessity of unification is lower than the response of other generations. And also, starting from 2020, you can see that those who believe that unification is needed goes down. But in particular, if you look at Gen MC, if the other generations believe that there is a need for unification, and those are about 50% of the respondents, only about 30% of Gen MC believe that unification is necessary. So as you can see, compared to the other generations, the MZ generation, a limited number or a limited percentage of the MZ generation believe that unification is necessary, relatively speaking. And also, in terms of the urgency of reunification, you can see the responses here. How urgent do you believe that reunification is required? And compared to all of the other generations, you can see that the response by the MZ generation was low. They did not believe, relatively speaking, that there is an urgency compared to other generations. And now, here you see the preference of the status quo. You can see that the MZ generation, compared to the other generations, have a higher level of preference for the status quo. And you can see that after the MC generation, then the X generation, and the second round of baby boomers, and the first round of baby boomers, you can see the younger you are, the greater preference you have for the status quo. And also, indifference towards reunification is the same. Generation MC has greater indifference towards reunification compared to the other generations. And this year, actually, what is notable is that in the case of Gen X, there is an increase in indifference towards reunification, whereas Gen MZ's indifference has decreased. You can see, therefore, the two generations have a similar level of indifference towards reunification. But overall, you can see that the younger you are, the more indifferent you are towards reunification. I showed you a number of graphs, and these are graphs, time series, but of course, the political preference or other factors have not been controlled. So after these variables are controlled, then perhaps we can have a more in-depth analysis. But when you look at these graphs, you can see that the data itself did not control for the other variables and did not take into account the personal characteristics of the respondents. Perhaps that would be a task for future research. And later on, when I do have that type of analysis, then I would like to share them with you at a later point in time. And also, if you look at the generational differences of the perception of reunification, you could see that older generations have a greater level of support for the necessity of unification. Why is it so? According to the survey that I just introduced, there were a question for the reasons for unification. And there are two that are shown on the screen. First of all, because we are of the same nation, ethnic Koreans. You can see that compared to other generations, the response by Gen MC had a lower response rate in support of reunification because we are of the same ethnic Korean race. But when it comes to the reason for eliminating the threat of war, you can see that Gen MC has a higher percentage of responding to this as a reason for supporting reunification. So rather than nationalistic reasons, when it comes to Gen MZ, they have practical reasons if they are, in fact, in support of unification. So if the MZ generation does support unification, there's a tendency to be more realistic for supporting unification. Then we looked into the reasons for not supporting reunification in this survey. And there's two shown on the screen. First, because of the financial burden after reunification. I think that this is something that is felt and recognized by all generations, and surprisingly, Gen MC showed similar response rate compared to the other generations. Also, social cultural differences, this response was higher among the Gen MC respondents. So we can see that the Gen MC are concerned about the social cultural differences after reunification. And also, we could see that there's a difference among the different generations when it comes to their perception of the benefits of reunification. We asked about what would be the benefits of reunification, and one of the response being beneficial to South Korea. You can see that the response among the Gen MZs are lower for this, whereas beneficial for myself, you can see that the second boomers had responded higher compared to the other generations when it comes to beneficial for myself as a reason or as one of the benefits of reunification. So the MZ generation and X generation, you can see that there is a difference between the younger and the older generation here as well. I showed you a number of graphs, but what I would like to touch upon and emphasize in conclusion is that Generation MC is the only generation with the majority of this generation being against reunification. They're also the only generation that supports reunification because of elimination of the threat of war rather than nationalistic reasons. So rather than supporting reunification because we are of the same ethnic Korean race, the Gen MC, if they are in support of reunification, they would support reunification because this would eradicate the threat of war. As for the reasons for not supporting reunification, the MC generation seem to be concerned about the social cultural differences between South and North Korea more than other generations. So the MZ generation are known to be more practical. And when it comes to reunification, we could see that the younger generations regard the benefits of reunification to be lower, but the opinions differ between Gen X and the MZ versus the boomers, baby boomers. And it can be interpreted that low expectations for personal benefits of reunification is one of the reasons why younger generations do not actively support reunification. It was observed that the reason that most South Koreans support reunification up till now was because of nationalism rather than the anticipation of the benefits that reunification would bring. But now the younger people tend to support reunification for reasons such as eliminating threats of war, so they are more practical. And when Gen MC becomes a mainstream of society, when they are in the leading positions of society, I think that this is something that we should keep in note. And also when nationalistic justification is not sufficient enough to support reunification, we should keep in mind that there are different perceptions to this generation when it comes to unification. Yes, thank you very much. You talked about the different perceptions towards unification among the different generations, and you showed a number of graphs. So, I think that the graph that was highlighted in the color blue was really noticeable. And you could see that as the time goes by, you could see that the ups and downs were more radical or dramatic compared to the other generations. So I think that in some sense you can say that the unification perception of Gen MC has not been fully established perhaps. That's why as time goes by, there is a big drastic change by the different years. So why do you think this is so? Yes, as you mentioned, the Gen MC, if you remember the graph that I showed you, well, compared to the other generations, have a greater volatility. For example, in 2018, they believed that, or they were in support of unification, but then after 2020, you could see a drastic change, and they have turned towards not being support of unification. MC generation are the younger generation, and so being young, I think that their values or their viewpoints of international affairs can frequently change compared to the older generation, relatively speaking. So when it comes to inter-Korean relations, I think that the MC generation might show a similar tendency. And also when they were in their teens, they have been exposed to negative inter-Korean experiences. With the start of the Moon Jae-in administration in 2018, shortly there was a positive trend in terms of inter-Korean relations. But aside from that period, there were more negative images of inter-Korean relations that the MZ generation were exposed to. And perhaps the starting point for the MZ generation when they think about inter-Korean relations is negative. And also there's a high volatility. So when inter-Korean relations improve, perhaps there is a potential for their perception towards reunification to move towards a positive direction. Yes, so perhaps there can be a special approach that we can take for the MZ generation when it comes to the issue of reunification.
Next, I would like to ask Mr. Min Jae-myung to introduce yourself. And Eunungjeongi Brewery, I would like to ask you to maybe promote your firm as well. It's a great pleasure to meet you all. I am Min Jae-myung, CEO of Eunungjeongi Brewery. We currently make traditional liquor at Daejeon, and we had a very good opportunity to learn from a North Korean defector on how we can actually brew traditional North Korean liquor. And that was introduced at SBS, a special documentary film, and we will be soon marketing this product. We do know that there are differences between the North and South, but we all like the Pyongyang cold noodles, the naengmyeon. And I think that liquor can also be a way for us to engage in exchange, bringing our glasses together, and we all share the same history and tradition. However, we are divided, and we've been following and carrying and handing down the tradition separately. And I think that with this exchange in traditional culture, we may be able to go back to our roots to see how we should join hands and continue on to hand down this culture. And you can see here we have hanbando, which is a different type of liquor. And in the north, they use environmental friendly ways to brew their liquor. What we did was ferment the remains from coffee, and we've been able to brew this. And this is a way we've actually utilized chiara, a poetry from a well-known poet of France, to package this liquor. If we think about traditional beverages, there could be many ways to do this, but you did meet with the North Korean refugee. But I wanted to understand, was there maybe another opportunity or reason why you decided to go into North Korean traditional liquor? For more than 400, for the past 40 years, I've lived in Daejeon, and there is this culture under the name of home liquor. In other words, we all come together at home to brew our own liquor. But this is a tradition that seems to be lost these years. It's the same case both in the South and North. So I thought that such cultures should be revived and restored. And in that aspect, I decided to meet with the North Korean refugees, and I was able to gain understanding on what kind of raw materials or ingredients were used in brewing traditional beverage in the North, and it actually helped me expand my scope of knowledge on liquor. I never thought that traditional liquor can actually enable exchange between the two Koreas before I met with you. And I think that there may be many that have that same perception. So I would like to understand, maybe there were different responses regarding your stance, your exchanges, and anything, any anecdotes or episodes that you would like to share with us in your past experience. I met with wonderful people. Thanks to their interest in liquor, we also had many foreign correspondents visiting our brewery. Washington Post and a total of 11 foreign media outlets came all the way to Daejeon to sample our liquor, our products. And we also had the Japanese media outlets showing their interest in the product as well. And Jim Rogers, one of the top 3 investors, when he paid visit to Korea, I had a chance to have a meal with him. And he suggested to invest in this business. When a startup develops new products and facilitates inter-Korean cooperation, he thought that that would be greatly beneficial. So I really thank him for his insights and his comments. But I did not accept his investment. Of course, I know that it's even difficult to get that proposal from Jim Rogers, but to reject, I think that what would be the odds? But what I wanted to do was have a clear business plan in place, and I asked him, can I call you back afterwards when we do have a robust product proposal and pipeline in place? So I think that proposal is still valid, and I would like to contribute to Korean culture going forward. Yeah, I wish you the greatest success in your business. And let us now move on to Miss Elodie. I can see that you are a TV personality, and you also researched this field. And I know that you also were a part of the special documentary by Sam Hamilton under the name of Face North. And was there a reason why you decided to take part in that program? Yes, hello. I am Elodie from France. It's a great pleasure to meet you all. Initially, I went to the north because there was a soccer game between the two Koreas. We knew that those with South Korean nationality could not go and film. the game. So we thought about putting together a special documentary, and we had foreign celebrities come together. I majored in ethnology, and my subtopic was on Korean dance. And as I was living in Korea, I started to think more of the North before I lived in the South. I really did not have any interest in North Korea because other than the images that I saw on TV, I really didn't have much thought. I didn't put much thought on the North. But as I was living in Korea, I got acquainted with Korean culture, Korean history, and I was also able to learn a lot about the relationship between the two Koreas. And not only that, I have an acquaintance, a friend that actually had relatives in the North. And I thought, well, this is not something in past history. It's something that's impacting us right now. And it's taught as its past history, but I was able to understand that this was reality. It was something that was impacting our present. So I started to give some deeper thought into inter-Korean relations. When I engage in field survey, in accordance with my major of ethnology, in many cases I would of course focus on the facts. And then what I tried to do was deliver my thoughts and my emotions, and that's very difficult to do. You have to communicate that to an audience or maybe write it up in a paper. But if I had the original image, if that was steadfast in my mind, I think that in itself would have led to negative connotations about the North. So what I tried to do was to imagine North Korea. I think that maybe imagination can be dangerous. It can be risky because you can imagine all sorts of things. It can lead to negative prejudice. It can lead to a stereotype. And it can really lead to a very dark image of something. So I thought maybe I should try not to imagine, try not to think too deeply, and with an open mind go to the North and see what I see and feel what I feel. So that was the starting point behind my journey to the North. So I would like to understand, I'm sure that you had an image of the North as you've mentioned, and as you experienced the North in person. Was there a great difference between the two? Well, as I have already mentioned, I tried to start off on a blank slate and take a very objective view of the North. But when I first did lay foot, I saw blue skies and I saw farmers working on the fields. But I also saw the dazzling sun in the skies, and I was surprised to see that. And I was disappointed at myself, and I was also baffled altogether because it's true that even if I did wanted to start off from a blank slate, I came to understand that I did have a very negative image and stereotype of the North. So I saw the sun, and it's nothing to be surprised about, but you can see that I had this very deep and negative and dark stereotype of the North, and just seeing the sun so bright in the North surprised me. And the buildings were painted in bright colors, and that also surprised me as well. So I was wondering, the image that I had of the North, and because of that, it led me to gain this very negative connotation of the North. So I was a bit disappointed about myself, and it also led me to think about the North with a different angle. I've never visited the North, and I'm pretty sure that most of Gen MZ probably would have never had any first-hand experience at the North, and there's a lot of prejudice and stereotypes out there. So then, I think that the implication here that we can draw is that we need to find a way to resolve this, to lift and eliminate these stereotypes and prejudice. This conference is on broadcasting and communications exchange, so my next question is the following. So, as you had the experience in filming a program in both the North and South, were there any differences that you experienced in the process? Well, I think it's not that much different because I am a foreigner, a European, and as a French national, for me, it all seems quite similar because in Korea, I'm still a foreigner. So, in terms of how I express myself, I always have to be prudent and cautious. And it was the same case in the North. I was cautious in my words and my expressions. I tried to be prudent and I was always on my toes to make sure that the other would not perceive me as negatively. But then again, I think it wasn't much different from my everyday life. At Charles de Gaulle Airport in France, you see the soldiers, they're all armed. But as I was living in Korea, I didn't see many soldiers all armed. But then in the north, I was all of a sudden quite nervous because in France, of course, because I saw all of these armed soldiers or security guards. And it was a bit similar in the north because you can see that the atmosphere was different. It was based on a completely different rule set. So I was nervous and I wanted to do well, but I was afraid that I might make mistakes. So I was always nervous and tense and anxious. So with regard to what I say, my actions, I try to be as cautious as possible to make no mistakes in the process. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing with us your experience. And during the panel discussion, I would like to also ask you some more questions. Thank you.
한국학
Next, Mr. Peter Moody. So you are majoring in Korean studies. Is there a special reason for selecting Korean studies? Well, during my undergrad years, I majored in sociology and I had a lot of interest in religion, especially Buddhism. And at that time, there was no Korean studies major. There was not a lot of schools that offer that type of program. And so what I did was I took a course in Korean Buddhism. And I was able to learn about the Venerable Wonhyo, the Buddhist monk, and his story was very interesting. And while I was residing in Korea, I was able to experience the Korean culture, and that led me to take greater interest in the Korean culture. The modern history of Korea and also the development of capitalism in Korea also became an area of interest for me. North Korean studies, especially the music of North Korea, was something that I started to study. And you might be interested why I decided to study this topic. Well, in Korea, there's a lot of diverse religion and cultural aspects. And I was interested in such topics. So I wanted to take a look at the writings about Korea's religion. And I was able to learn about the Juche ideology. And there was a book that expressed the Juche ideology as a type of religion. I'm not sure whether the Juche ideology can be seen as a religion, but that type of ideology of North Korea about Juche became a source of curiosity for me. And so the North Korean society and culture also became an area of interest for me. And also, while I was pursuing my master's degree, I was studying the Cheolima movement, and I was able to see that arts and also music had a great influence in the North Korean society and the system. It had a great impact, and it was very important. Most of the North Korean studies was focused on the political perspective, the political side, whereas I wanted to approach North Korea from a different perspective. Yes, also, I noticed that you are interested in North Korean music, and I'm sure that there was a special reason for you to take interest in North Korean music. You're probably aware of South Korean music as well. So, among the North Korean music, especially, what are you focusing on, and can you compare North Korean music with that of South Korea? Are there any differences? Yes. Before I answer that question, I would like to show you a video clip that I prepared. Yes, here it is.
이 세상에 우리 어머니처럼 근심하는 어머니는 어디 있던가. 덩드는 이 나라 새벽길을 먼저 걷고 숨는 길도 앞서 걷는 우리 어머니.
So, if you look at the video clip, well, that was some of the representative music of North Korea. As you know, there is the Moranbong band, and such modern electronic music started to become popular. And then during the COVID pandemic, so the first one was about before the COVID pandemic, and then starting with the COVID pandemic, you can see that very sophisticated North Korean image was something that the North Korean regime wanted to showcase to the North Korean people. And so that was reflected into the music. And so I took a look at the North Korean music from a historical perspective. And most of the North Korean musicians were heavily dependent on the North Korean state. The North Korean state was also heavily dependent on the musicians as well. So you can see that there is a mutual dependence between the state and also the North Korean musicians. And this is something that we should take note of. Not only that, if you look at North Korea, well, we could do an analysis on whether North Korean music was influenced by the global community. And also, we could also see the international community's influence on the North Korean society and the North Korean society's response and attitude. Yes, you mentioned about the characteristics of North Korea. And North Korea actually incorporates various different cultural components or aspects. But were there any difficulties in researching North Korean music? And what were the strengths and the weaknesses of North Korean music? Well, North Korean music, you were asking about my study and the strengths and the weaknesses, is that correct? Well, the strength is that as I study North Korean music, the strength of studying North Korean music is that I can listen to the music, so there's no time to be bored. And also, when it comes to music, North Korean people show the same response when they are exposed to music. And when I was studying North Korean music, I could see that there were a lot of political aspects to the music of North Korea, but at the same time, there were non-political aspects of North Korean music as well. For example, depending on the genre or the style of the music, there were non-political music, and also political and economic themes are dealt with in some of the music of North Korea. But at the same time, when North Koreans talk about the music, well, there are different views about music, so that are not always political or economic. And by looking into the music of North Korea, I could obtain a better understanding about the thoughts and the thinking of North Korean people. And also, in Korea, South Korea, it is actually difficult to access the North Korean music. So those are some of the difficulties in studying North Korean music. And a lot of the North Korean music are songs of praise. That's what I find to be unfortunate, because the melody itself is really good, but the lyrics to that music has that kind of content, praising someone. So, for example, praising the leader of North Korea. And I think that diverse themes can be found, however, when studying the lyrics of North Korean music, so that's a good point. Professor Kim Seung-hee, you listened to the three panelists speak, and what's your impression? Well, I study economics, and so being here on the stage with these three panelists, I found what they were saying was very interesting. For example, traditional liquor and alcohol, and also culture and the arts are the field of expertise and interest of these people, and it's different from my field of expertise. But I was able to see that these are relevant to North Korean studies. And the panelists up here on stage, what they mentioned, for example, they talked about food or culture and the arts. And if indeed we have exchanges between the two Koreas, could be the easy areas that we can begin such exchanges, because we can put the prejudice or ideology aside, and we can deal with the topics that are of general interest or universal interest throughout the world. For example, food and the arts. These could be areas that we can start inter-Korean exchanges. Yes, I have a question that goes to all of you. You are engaged in various different types of activities or businesses. And so I want to ask you, when it comes to the perception of unification of the MZ generation, in order for the MZ generation to be more interested in unification, what would be the approach that you would like to take so that we can have the generation MZ be more interested in North Korea, have a better understanding of North Korea? I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, first off, I think that we can get more acquainted with a glass of liquor, for instance. I've mentioned that poet Baudelaire of France wrote this wonderful poem on this package, and I think that sometimes with a little bit of alcohol inside us actually helps us go down that path to finding solutions than being just sober. So, of course, in many cases we think about always being attentive, but maybe we can actually bring our glasses together to really immerse ourselves into this relationship. Yes, thank you. Ality, I have the same question for you as well. How will we be able to inch closer to Gen MZ? Well, I have the same, I am in agreement with Professor Kim. Through food and through culture and music, we may be able to connect the hearts and minds of the two Koreas. And as a foreigner living in Korea, I think that we also can play a role through TV programs and shows. I believe that foreigners in Korea can actually express what life is really like in Korea, so we may be able to play a role. Scholars study unification always say that we need to take a multilateral approach, taking into account the neighboring countries as well as the international community. Moving on to Mr. Peter Moody, your take on this one, please.
Well, as I mentioned before, the pop music of North Korea has the songs that deal with praise of the leaders, but at the same time, there are some songs that deal with the daily lives of the people. And so I think that inter-Korean cooperation exchange can be possible in the field of music. For example, we can utilize social media to share the music contents among the two Koreas, perhaps. And what is important is that the Korean media should be more open towards the data and the media and the contents of North Korea. Because as a researcher, I need greater access to North Korean information and material. But not only that, I think that the South Korean people, well, they can understand the difference between the culture and the arts of South Korea versus that of North Korea. But at the same time, they would be able to see some of the commonalities. Some people talk about the propaganda or the agitation side of North Korean culture and contents. But I think that that type of aspect now has been weakened these days. I have short video clips of North Korean music uploaded sometimes, and there are a lot of people who really enjoy that. And for example, there was a North Korean choir composed of male members, and they were compared to the music of BTS, for example. And also, there are not a lot of followers, but nevertheless, that content that I uploaded received good response from a lot of people. So I think that we need the contents. If not, there will be a greater distance that we feel with North Korea, and perhaps the distance might grow further. Yes, I agree 100% with what you just said. There are political differences between the two Koreas, and also economic gap is widening as well. But at the same time, when it comes to the cultural differences, I think that that might be a more realistic challenge for the two Koreas. So thank you very much for your comments. And now I think it is time to open up the floor for Q&A. So if there are questions from the floor, I would like you to address your question to our speaker or any of the panelists here. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation on the unification perception of Gen MZ. And Professor Kim has given us a good presentation on the survey.
And also she gave us some future outlooks as well. But when we think about the issue of unification of the Korean Peninsula, well, let's say that there is the moment of unification that comes to us. And I do believe that there has to be a consensus among the people of Korea. If not, North Korea, it came to mind that perhaps if we do not have that national consensus for unification, perhaps North Korea might tend to want integration with another country. So I do believe that the perspective on unification of the MZ generation is very important. And so I think that the presentation by Professor Kim was excellent, but I want to ask you, the MZ generation, well, do they have access to objective information about North Korea? Do they have good access to such information and data? And also, perhaps, are they exposed to distorted information of North Korea? Because that would lead to negative results. So I want to ask you, how do you think that the MZ generation can become more positive towards unification, take more interest in North Korea? Is there a way, in your view, to deepen the interest of the MZ generation towards North Korea? Thank you very much for that question and your comments. So like you said, well, I myself was part of the MZ generation, and I thought about why this generation is indifferent or hostile towards unification of the Korean Peninsula. And perhaps it's because of the perception that we have of North Korea, because we do not have any direct link with North Korea. We do not have separated family members living in North Korea anymore as a member of the MZ generation. And the news about the North Korean regime or Kim Jong-un or the launch of missiles, most of the news that we gain access to are negative information or negative news about North Korea. So if you are continuously exposed towards these negative news and information about North Korea, of course you build a negative perspective towards North Korea and also unification. So I think that rather than the North Korean regime, the MZ generation should be more the focus should be placed on the North Korean people when it comes to the the MZ generation. But the thing is that there's not a lot of information that the MZ generation can gain access to. The only limited information that they do obtain is from the testimony of the North Korean defectors who appear on South Korean broadcasting programs. But those information also are very limited. And so I think that when it comes to North Korea, the information that is provided to the MZ generation is very limited. Their exposure is very limited. So I mentioned this before, but these daily topics, everyday topics, which could be food or culture or the arts, I think that giving more exposure to these topics to the MZ generation could be a way for them to become more acquainted to North Korea and become more familiar with North Korea, because right now there's too big of a distance between South Korean, the MZ generation, and North Korea. So if that kind of perception continues, then I think that that would be hard. So we need to drive towards a more positive perception of unification among the MZ generation. Yes, thank you. Are there any other questions? It could be a question or it could be a comment. So if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand.
네, 그럼 제가 대신
Yes, so then I would like to ask a question to our panelists. North Korean music, sometimes it seems too propaganda for me because it always seems to have a political element to it. It seems a bit rigid and stiff. However, the second video by Peter Moody, you showed us, I can see that the sentiment is quite similar to that of South Korea. If I look at that piece, that clip, especially our parents' generation or maybe our older sisters and brothers' generation may have had that same type of sentiment in enjoying the arts. But this panel, as you know, is all about MZ generation. And Gen MZ they have been exposed to pop culture, to hip hop, and you can see that they may have a different type of taste towards music. But with North Korean music, will we be able to really have the MZ generation of both the North and South come to a consensus or enjoy the same arts? If we want to engage in any exchange with music, wouldn't there be limitations considering that they probably have different tastes towards music? So what's your take on that one?
Yes. So I want to answer this question accurately, so I would like to speak in English.
I think you bring up a very important point about the social distance between North and South Korea and the fact that there's some limitations with music. I think we saw that in 2018 with the Samjian Orchestra coming to the South and then pop artists in the South coming to the North. But I also think that there are keys to make it more successful. North Korean text says that their music can change based on cultural exchange with other countries. And we can see examples of that in the development of North Korean music. 2018 I thought that the North Korean Samjian Orchestra focused on the older generation because the older generation, the oldest generation, the first baby boomer generation, had the most negative attitudes towards North Korea. And so based on research I've done after the Olympics and the concert, the negative attitudes towards North Korean people went down among the older generation the most. I also think that South Korean music really appeals to North Korean people because there were defectors who said they heard about the performances and they were really interested in it, and some of them even defected to the South because of the performances. But I think the next step is to reverse the target audience. I think that the South can maybe try to target the older generation in North Korea who are used to more ballads. Some of them are familiar with Korean ballads rather than just simply K-pop, because some of them felt distance of K-pop, especially with the rap and stuff. And I also think that North Korea, or perhaps with South Korea's help, can try to appeal more to the younger generation in South Korea. There's some music that sounds similar to trot music, and there's also kind of a new interest among young people in trot music in the South. So I think that there is a way to move forward with music diplomacy despite the limitations. And North Korea also avoids doing songs that are too political in their music diplomacy. But maybe the political issue has to be addressed first, not just by South Korea, but also different countries in the world. And so I think cooperative exchanges with not only South Korea, but also other countries can help make peace more possible and sustainable on the Korean peninsula.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. And so, is there a last question? Yes, thank you very much for your comments. I would like to give my question while sitting. Now, if you look at the graphs provided to us by Professor Kim, you can see that there was a difference of perception when it comes to the status quo. But I think that it was less than 1/3. So those who support the status quo is around 1/3 or less than that, which means that people desire change. Of course, when it comes to benefit, there were difference of perceptions. I'm curious about the data that you have when it comes to the losses that people might suffer from unification. Well, when it comes to the loss that people will suffer from unification, I do not have any data. The reason that there is a lower preference for status quo, if I may explain that, well, there was a single question about your perception of unification, and the answer was either we should maintain the status quo, unification should take place at an earlier period, or it should take place slowly, or indifferent. So there were just a number of drop-down answers that you can select, and I think that among what was offered to the people to select from, the people who selected the status quo was relatively lower, but I think that the majority, there would be a greater number of people who would have selected indifference, that they're indifferent to unification. I hope that answers your question, and thank you very much. So this concludes session 2, the roundtable discussion. I would like to thank all of the panelists for your participation. Yes, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause.
하셨습니다.
Thank you very much for joining us in the round table. So it's about overcoming the generation barriers. And we talked about how we can engage in exchange in broadcasting and communication, going beyond the limitations of generations between the two countries, the two Koreas. So thank you, moderator, and thank you, panelists, for your contributions. Let us now move on to the last program of the day, which is the panel discussion. We would like to rearrange the stage and then invite you back. So please stay with us and bear with us for just a moment. Thank you.
네, 20
We are here at the 2022 International Conference in Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications, and we are at the last session of the day. I hope you're enjoying the event, and this has proved to be beneficial. So we have heard experts talk about their experience of broadcast exchanges with North Korea and also various aspects related to inter-Korean broadcasting and communications. And now we will hold a panel discussion in depth under the topic of inter-Korean cooperative exchanges in broadcasting and communications by national consensus. The moderator of this discussion is Professor Lee Jung-chul, Department of Political International Relations of Seoul National University. And also, as discussants, we have Associate Professor Tomumi Mori of the Foreign Studies of Setsunan University sent a video message. And also, the speakers of the first session are here with us today. And also, the moderator of the second session, Roundtable, Professor Kim Jina, is also with us. So, we are joined by Professor Ha Seung-hee and Managing Director Kim Hyung-kyung and Team Leader Mr. Lee Chan-soo. So, I will hand over the mic to the moderator.
Thank you very much. Today, we are talking about inter-Korean broadcasting and communications exchanges. And thank you all for the wonderful presentations. Recently, with the state secretaries of Germany, there was an event that took place at the Ministry of Unification. And I thought that it was just one of the many formalities. However, those from East Germany and those from West Germany had this debate in front of the Korean audience. So they talked about all sorts of topics. I thought that they were quite antiquated topics, but they had this passionate debate, and there was a keynote speaker at the forum, and the gist of this the keynote presentation was that for the past 30 years, East Germany gave up on everything, and they had to deny all of their values of the past. So they were denied overall. But during the COVID years, they came to find that the important values of East Germany was not properly or fairly assessed. So that was basically the gist of the presentation. So when it comes to welfare and labor policies, there were some key value sets of East Germany. It seems a bit rigid and not as refined, but they did have their own set of values. However, with the unification, it was not acknowledged at all by the West. That has led to a great sense of loss. But in the flip side, maybe West Germany would think that their values gained the victory. And it was about the past 30 years being westernizing the East to make just another duplicate of West Germany. But you can see that it's been 30 years, but such debate is still ongoing. And the West Germans also were quite surprised with the situation. As you know, Germany, even before unification, East Germans were able to watch the TV programs of West Germany, and there was a high level of exchange between the two. And they were unified in 40 years, but for us, it's been 75 years since this division. And it got me to think that at the end of the day, West Germany may not have had an accurate perception towards the East, and maybe it's not about economic integration, and it's not about who enjoys a higher quality of life. But the fact that the other half was not acknowledged for their value sets, and that led to a sense of loss, I think, may be a critical challenge. So if we look at the far right political parties, they are gaining popularity right now. Poland and Hungary and other East European countries are also seeing the right wing gaining victory, and it seems to be the same case in the east part of the unified Germany. For us, in the process of unification between the two Koreas, it's important to understand and perceive North Korea as is. And I think that that experience will determine the fate for the two Koreas. But for the MZ generation, they've never paid a visit to Kumgang Mountain, and I think that that leads to a sense of deprivation. And that's one point that was mentioned during the talk in session one and two. So how are we? What are we doing to better our understanding regarding North Korea? I think that this is a critical task at hand for us for the future. So, listening to the presentations, I once again thought that broadcasting, communications, exchange, and cooperation in this realm may be important. There were three presentations, and particularly with regard to Professor Ha's presentation, Professor Tumi Mori sent a video in response to that presentation. It's 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so let us watch that video, and I would like to ask Professor Ha to respond back to Professor Mori's talk.
Good afternoon. I am Professor Mori from the Setsunan University of Japan. I would like to give my comments on the presentation given by Professor Ha Sung-hee on the topic of the use of YouTube propaganda media in North Korea. So I would like to utilize my PPT stacks. So this is actually a 10-minute video. So first of all, let me begin with the overall comment on the presentation. Now, the slides provided by the speaker, he mentioned that there was a change in the strategy of propaganda and agitation. But I do believe that it was not a change of the strategy, but the tactics. Because if you look at the Joseonmal Unabridged Dictionary, there is a difference between propaganda versus agitation. Propaganda is logically and systematically explaining to the public certain ideas, theories, and policies, and thus have the public theoretically accept and acknowledge such ideas, theories, and policies. The agitation is defined as a form of political ideology or work that appeals to the masses to carry out the revolutionary task, boost their revolutionary momentum, and directly provoke them into the implementation of party government policies. And there are political agitation and economic agitation. So if you look at this dictionary, based on what has been defined, agitation is an activity for carrying out the Korean Revolution, the Joseon Revolution, and is a concept that is basically applied at present to the people of North Korea. The North Korean authorities do not require foreigners to carry out revolutionary tasks. Therefore, North Korea's use of YouTube to spread content is not agitation, but rather propaganda. So I would like to mention that under the Kim Jong-un administration regime, when it comes to the strategy for propaganda, there has been no change in terms of the strategy, and it's difficult to actually change the strategy itself. But when it comes to the tactics, as it was noted by the presenter, there has been a change. For example, Kim Il-sung and the Kim Jong-il regime focused on the appealing to the public about the greatness of the leader or about the legitimacy of the regime. That was a focal point, whereas recently you can see that the daily lives of the North Korean people have been widely used as contents for these programs that have been created. So we can see that the strategy has not changed in terms of emphasizing the superiority of socialist Choson. But when it comes to the tactics, rather than focusing on promoting the noble image of a leader or the abstract and very unilateral materials that were used to promote the party of North Korea, we can see that gradually there is a turn towards introducing the daily lives of the people. And so I do believe that there had been a change in the tactics, but it's very difficult to fundamentally change the strategy. And so the propaganda actually is
정치 이데올로기와 그 해석에 영향을 줄 가능성이 있습니다.
has an impact on the political actions because it has a political aspect to it.
사상이 정치 이데올로기로부터
And so
일꾼들은
those who carry out propaganda actually
입장에서는 전략이 아닌 정치를
have difficulty changing the strategy itself. And that's why diverse tactics are now being implemented and there has been a change in the tactics. So Bilibili and YouTube, the platforms, have been utilized, and the utilization of such global platforms has been implemented as a tactic for its propaganda policy. But the strategy itself has not changed, and the utilization of the global platforms, rather than economic significance, has considered the political effect of taking on this tactic. So that is what is noted on page 28. So once again, the utilization of the global platform took into account its political impact rather than thinking about the economic impact. So in order to promote the North Korean society to the global audience, the focal point has shifted towards the daily lives of the North Korean people. But the change of tactics means many different things. For example, the platform that can be used by anyone has been utilized to create vlogs. And this actually is a well-established global trend. And North Korea has understood and acknowledged this global trend and has started to utilize it and implement it in full-fledged, which is quite interesting. The speaker also mentioned that there has been a change in the propaganda and agitation strategy. But once again, it was not a change in the strategy, but rather it was a change in tactics. So I would like to ask the speaker to comment on my view. And next, I would like to go into individual comments on specific aspects. So if you look at this presentation, well, first of all, it touches upon the YouTube contents of North Korea. And there has been not great change in terms of mainly focusing on the news coverage highlights. So if you look at new DPRK, of course, there has been an implementation of different editing methods or formats or the videotaping. And also you can see that English subtitles and narrations have been utilized. But also there are a lot of contents and videos that do not utilize such English language content or subtitles or voiceovers. And also,
해외 전략 사업으로
the translation into English, however, can be seen as a way to target the global audience, but that was not a significant change because it was not implemented overall. It was just limited to some. And also in terms of the editing technique, of course, the change in these techniques were innovative, but the contents have not changed that much, so it was not that innovative. And also, if you look at Sally Parks, the Song-A channel, the level of updates are not that frequent. For example, if you look at the videos that have been uploaded after 5 months from the launch of this channel, there are only 8. So you can see that as a propaganda material, the impact or the influence of this channel is limited. And next on page 4, the presenter talked about the second National Elementary Workers Conference and also the letter of Kim Jong-un. And basically, this was targeting the internal audience. So this was propaganda activity targeting the internal audience, but it was not targeting the external audience outside of North Korea. And so I'm a skeptic about how much relationship utilization of the global platform has with North Korea's propaganda activity, as was mentioned by the speaker. And also, when it comes to the utilization of North Korean contents, I do agree with what the speaker has said. So the daily lives of the general public is introduced, but there is also the risk of generalizing what people see through the videos, generalizing that these are the daily lives of the general public. And so there is reason to be cautious about that because there is a risk of misunderstanding. I do agree with that. And also, I am curious whether the material that has been showcased can be considered as material appropriate for academic studies. In Japan, there is not an agreement that such contents can be used for academic studies, so I'm curious about the viewpoint on this in South Korea. And also, the mainstream media of North Korea, which is Nodong Shinmun and the Chosun Central Communication and also the Chosun Central Television, the articles or the broadcasting contents. Now, can they be regarded as equal to the contents of what we see on YouTube? And if that is possible, then what would be the criteria applied? And if it is not possible, if these contents are different, why do you perceive that these contents are different? I would like to ask the opinion of the speaker. Thank you very much for your attention. Yes, thank you very much. So we heard from the professor, Professor Mori. He usually talks faster than this. And I think that is because he made a video for his comments. He intentionally spoke slower. So he has studied the cultural aspects of North Korea for a long time. So thank you very much. And I would like to ask Professor Ha to respond.
Thank you. Although Dr. Mori is not here, thank you so much. It's great to see you on video. Thank you very much for that detailed comment and also some food for thought for future research. So the questions that you had, well, there were many, and I may be eating up a lot into the time, but I do ask for your understanding. So the first question has to do with propaganda, instigation, and strategy and tactics. And you've talked about the definition in the Korean dictionary. I think that there were certain concepts that I did not use in my presentation, but strategy and tactics and propaganda and instigation. In many cases, the North actually use both words in the same context together, so I would like to ask for your understanding on that one. It does focus on emphasizing the strength and the power that their regime has, but I do know that they are changing their tactics and strategies along the way. And as mentioned in your comments, if I may divide up the strategy and tactics, recently, propaganda strategy and changes in strategy indicates that they're switching from political activities to economic activities. I mentioned that already in my presentation. Through diverse tactics, we're seeing some change in the form, but in terms of the strategy, propaganda on the ideology and worshiping the leader is their ultimate goal, and that makes us assume that there was intervention from the government to post up such videos. And with regard to strategy and tactics, what they wanted to do was utilize the global platform to show to the world that they're just a typical country, a normal state. And in that aspect, you've mentioned that they may have put a greater emphasis on the political impact. But North Korea and them trying to stress that they're a normal state, I think, has no area of disagreement. But the fact that they use this global platform, and if we think about the circumstance, there's also a political element to it, but then they also want to push ahead with economic development to boost tourism. So for in my point of view, I thought that there was a stronger commercial element to their usage. In March 2019, North Korea took part in the Vietnamese international tourism market. And this was an event for tourism, and it was the first time that they did take part in such an event. In 2018, more than 3,000 Vietnamese tourists were to visit the North in 2019 with Chosun Travel Agency and with Hanoi Tourist of Vietnam. They decided to put in place a direct flight to Pyongyang from Vietnam. So there were these plans to boost tourism. And against this backdrop, from 2019, we've been seeing vlogs posted by the North. And I thought that in this same context, they were trying to find a way to enhance commercial value in the postings. Recently, due to the prolonged COVID-19, it's very difficult for them to open their borders. But as we can see in previous research and literature, they're trying to find a way to prevent any threat to the regime. And it's something that's been seen in socialist nations. But then we also see countries that are utilizing this platform to boost economic development. So what they're trying to do is trying to avoid the dilemma that comes from using the internet. And between stable regime and economic development, they're trying to make that strategic decision between the two, and it's the same case for the North. In the case of the news coverage highlights, I mentioned that there isn't much change in their strategy there, but as was already indicated, we saw the emergence of vlogs. A lot of YouTubers were actively engaging in their contents. And Sally Park's, this account, I've mentioned about the change in the account, and Dr. Morias mentioned the same. And when I was preparing the slides, at the time, there was no change to the account, but recently I think that they did change their name. And as mentioned, comments are disabled, and based on the children protection policy, the owner of the account may have disabled the comments, or maybe it was just an automatic disable coming from the children's protection policy. If we look at the number of subscribers, and we've been seeing more accounts coming from the North, South Koreans are therefore more aware of the activities on YouTube, and it seems to have a greater impact. And at the Second Workers' Elementary Conference, you've mentioned about the propaganda activities of the North and the global stage. And you can see that it's true that Kim Jong-un puts a lot of focus on how they can break away from the formalities, and that was mentioned at the Second National Elementary Workers Conference. But you can see that within their organization, they do have a publishing division that focuses on foreign media, foreign works, and we do see that they're trying to find a way to show that they're changing. There are also films and documentaries that they're putting together for propaganda reasons. So we think that what they're trying to do has some relationship to their propaganda work. And then you also talked about the link with journalism, not only in the North, but on YouTube. If you think about journalism, does it really play a role of journalism? I think that there are just limited contents that actually do play the role of journalism. Mostly it's based on a revenue model of ads. It's more on entertainment if you look at the contents. And the media outlets of Korea, this may be on a different angle, but you can see that particular brands would add vertical media on their sub-brands to create synergy, to add an entertainment factor to it. So this has to do with the revenue model of the media outlets. And even if there is some type of journalism that can be found in YouTube channels, I think that it's just very soft and implicit. So I think that on YouTube, in addition to vlog, we do see different types of formats and ways of expression, but this, I think, is a bit different from what you call as journalism. And in Korea, the research on North Korea vlogs are still at its infancy, so I think we need to further study this topic. And last but not least, you've mentioned about Korean Central TV and Rodong Shinmun and these major media. Can we say YouTube is on an equal footing with this, with all of these outlets? Well, it depends on how you see it, because for YouTube, it's more so a propaganda outlet where citizens do not have access to. However, in the case of the traditional outlets, you can see that the citizens do have access. So in that aspect, I don't think that the two are on equal footing. However, as mentioned in my presentation, YouTube accounts, which seems to be led by North Korean government, and if we believe that this assumption is true, we, I think, can say that it may be a bit difficult to maybe give it prominence, but as the producer or creator of the contents, in that aspect, maybe there are some areas where we can say that is equal to traditional media. Yes, thank you very much for your comments. North Korean researchers, or those research North Korea, have focused their research on text. So it was more so literature, text that we had to look into. But now there are more videos, and we have to understand the impact analysis. And what happens is that you really have to look in the sidelines. For instance, Kim Jong-un may make a speech, but you have to check the time on his wristwatch, for instance, in the video, and also on the shadow, which direction. So depending on that, the location may differ. So if Kim Jong-un, let's say, is on a horse, and there was such a video, so where is this? Is it somewhere near Wonsan? Is it in the west or east of Hodu Peninsula? And you can see a guiding light, a light post, and then a lighthouse, and then depending on that, you may be able to ascertain when and where Kim Jong-un was at that point in time. So of course we have a lot of data, a lot of video that we can refer to, but then it makes research even more complicated and complex. So that's in the lens of a researcher. But if we think about just this as an interesting topic to enjoy, is it about forming this consensus, or is this propaganda by the North? Is it just purely entertaining, a source of entertainment? So with regard to broadcasting communications in the North, there's a lot of controversy because there are different views towards its original purpose. So Dr. Ha, thank you very much for your comments, and let us now move on to Managing Director Kim.
So, Managing Director Kim, you are with MBC and you're in charge of unification the observatory, and the format that you're dealing with is actually, the format here is very difficult because we have many different topics that we're dealing with simultaneously. But I do have a question for you. I am interested on your viewpoint on the Korean programs. Which program related to North Korea has the highest viewership? And what do you think is the strength of that program? What's the weakness, perhaps? Can you analyze? Well, you just asked, I think, about the 이만가 program. That's a specific program, so perhaps I have to answer about that. 이만가 actually has a great impact. The testimonies of the North Korean people has been provided, and it has an entertainment and news aspect to it. So it actually garnered the attention of people, and I think that it expanded the market in terms of the consumers of such contents related to North Korea. But at the same time, I think that it gave a challenge to us, because from the perspective of viewership, the contents with the highest viewership, the program, is the window of North and South Korea. So during morning 7 o'clock news, of course, it's this program. After the news is over, after the 7 o'clock news is over, then it's aired at 8 o'clock. And people tend to just have their TV on. And also, especially the elderly people, they have the KBS channel turned on all the time. And so, through a format that's very familiar for the older generation, a lot of information related to North Korea is provided. And so, 이만갑민 is a program titled Now on My Way to Meet You. That's the English title. Anyhow, so I'm not sure which is the sub-contents. You talked about the different contents. There is a television that has the terrestrial broadcasting, and I'm not sure whether that's the main contents, or I'm not sure whether the YouTube contents is the main contents. Because if you look at the world that we live in today, well, we think of the short clips that have the edited versions. And also, in the past, what we did was we had the terrestrial broadcasting programming. We had a program designated for a certain time slot. But then later on, people would watch that again, or the short clips of that program through YouTube. So the consumers of media, well, I think that they consume the media has changed, and now there is a blur in terms of the main contents. Is it the program that is aired at that given time slot, or the short clips of that program? And also, in terms of the testimonies of the North Korean people, how much credibility should we give to their words? And also, how much impact does it have on our society? So I mentioned this during my presentation, a little bit about this. In the past, there was really a shortage of information, an absolute shortage. And so with the start of the satellite broadcasting by North Korea, that was like a blessing for us, because in the past, we had to resort to the 60-minute or 70-minute edited contents given to us by the government National Intelligence Agency. That was all we had. But then after that, what we did was we did an in-depth analysis of what was given to us. And so we dealt with the different topics related to North Korea, and we try to use the analysis to further update the information that we have. But nowadays, we are just flooded with information about North Korea. There are so many sources, and now we really have to refine the sources. We have to do pre-screening before we utilize the contents and the information. And also, I'm not sure whether I can use the word quality, but we need to identify the quality contents that we can create. How can we create quality contents is the challenge that is given to us. So what we do is, first of all, we verify the sources of information, and also we try to identify the good, the quality sources, so that we can abstract the quality contents from such sources. So I think that there has to be a turn of direction, and we have to go in that direction. Dating the sources and looking at the contents. I gave a lecture at one time, and someone was taking notes, and I looked at the notes, and that person actually was appearing on a program, a broadcasting program, and wanted to share what I just said. So there may be people who are not qualified to serve as a person who can give testimony about the North Korean society, but there are people who nevertheless play that role on broadcasting programs or other contents. So I think that we have to pre-screen, we have to be able to validate, and that is a challenge given to us. Yes, thank you very much. Now, if there is a fake news or a false news that has been given out, do you apologize for that officially? Well, I think that, of course, if there is a false news that goes out, we have to immediately correct it, but sometimes we miss the timing for that. But if that occurs, then rather than correcting it, we would come up with an alternative content that can replace the previous contents. And of course, there was a time when we had given an official apology. For example, there was a secretary of the Labor Party of North Korea named Kim Jae-kyung, and there was news that that person had come to South Korea. But actually, it was found out that that person had actually died. So, Yonhap News made that news report. It was a wrong report, but Yonhap actually apologized for that. I think giving false news is something that we cannot avoid. But nevertheless, Yonhap News was very graceful and apologized for that officially. And that was, I think, a model case. But if the intention is good, because North Korea continues to lie about itself and is a very reclusive society, if there is a wrong report that goes out about North Korea, then that is out of our hands. And sometimes, for example, there was a case where a defector would defect from North Korea, but then leave South Korea and go into North Korea again. There was a false news that went out that that person died, but actually that was the wrong news. That person actually made it back to South Korea. And what we did was we did apologize, saying that that was false news, saying that that person died. But because of that news, this person could safely make his or her way back to South Korea because people thought that he was or she was dead. So it was an apology, but not a real apology. But anyhow, when it comes to North Korean news, I think that an exception is applied because there are wrong, false news that goes out about North Korea, but there is an exception, and sometimes the internal rules or ethics are not met because when it comes to North Korean news, and that's another challenge for us. Okay, so Mr. Lee Chan-soo.
So in the north, we've been talking about ICT cooperation with the North, but North Korean sanctions are a great barrier. It's very difficult to overcome this. And it seems like this is the BAU, business as usual, and may make those that want this helpless. So the North seems to integrate itself into the Chinese network, and willfully so. But this ICT network and the fact that we're planning to engage in exchange and cooperation, especially for a profit-driven company, up to what extent are you willing to push ahead? Yes, as mentioned, as a company, in 2018 and 19, and if we go back to the early 2000s, and now we're seeing a change of atmosphere. And if we look into the reality, we're talking about ICT cooperation, but we also have medical services and healthcare. That's a key pillar for humanitarian aid. But then ICT is also, but ICT is very different, and it's faced with sanctions. So for a company that you've mentioned that generates profit, we need to, of course, take a realistic and pragmatic approach. But if you think about 2018 and 19, it was a situation that was not expected. So in order to, make inroads into that domain, it's very difficult to do, but we all do know that the premise is that there may be a massive change all of a sudden, therefore we need to prepare accordingly. And we're talking about inter-Korean cooperation, not North Korean assistance. So we really need to find a way to mutually benefit from this cooperation. And I think this is an area that we need to continue on to give some more thought to. Yes, I was at SERI until 2006 at that Economic Research Institute of Samsung. And I was a part of the North Korea research team at the time, and Samsung was engaged in North Korean cooperation projects. But in 2006, the North engaged in their first nuclear testing. And right after, the head of SERI was very angry. And he said that we no longer need a North Korea research team, and he told us to change the name of our team. So the name of the team changed to Economic Security Team. So we're talking about economic and security policies, but 15 years back, Samsung started, with this change of the name of the team, a focus on economy and security. Already, these big companies like Samsung, from 2005 and onwards, joined the ranks of global companies. And inter-Korean programs seem to be not their driving force, and they decided to switch to a risk management approach to make sure that there aren't any incidents happening with the North. SK is also a global company, and because of that, I did answer that I asked that previous question. So, is this project just like a plan B or backup, or do you really perceive this as a company as the driving engine or growth engine? I did not know that you would be asking such a question, but if I may respond, from 2008 and for around 2 years, the team that I was a part of was Inter-Korean Cooperation Planning Team. But what I do right now is completely different from what I did back then. But there are certain points to consider, of course. So I am not in the position to actually talk about or engage in the discourse of the direction of the company's global agenda, but I want to say that there are ups and downs in the relationship. And with this companies that do have such an agenda, it's very difficult to make this sustainable. So in terms of exchange and cooperation and the areas that I'm researching right now, it's not really tied to the strategy of the company. It's just something that I've been doing all along, and I think that it's the desirable way forward, and that's where I'm engaging in these programs. In your presentation, you mentioned that it's not about engaging in a series of activities. It's about catching up and maybe skipping some of the phases along the way. So if the North does catch up and does something with China, we do know that sometimes we'll be frustrated because it does not meet the standards. But then again, technological advancement may open up some new doors. So that's something to be hopeful for. And especially in the area of communications. And if we think about exchange and broadcasting, the communications network is the key infrastructure that's necessary. So I think that's something that we have to prepare in advance. And moving on to Dr. Kim Ji-nam.
So, Generation MZ, the panel discussion, you moderated that discussion. And when it comes to profitability and identity, we have many different discussions because unification is also about our identity. The relationship between identity and profitability, well, I think that we can take a look at it from a long-term perspective and a short-term perspective. And it's very difficult to place the two on the same line and try to compare apples in a manner of apples to apples and pears to pears. But anyhow, Professor Kim Ji-nam, perhaps you can do a wrap-up on this topic. Yes, Gen MZ. The students that I teach, they are also part of that generation. When it comes to issues related to North Korea and the Korean Peninsula, when I ask them a question, their response is, I don't really know. I think that's the most frequent thing that I hear. They're really not interested. They're indifferent. And they've never really thought about how they should perceive North Korea. And today we heard from Professor Kim Seung-hee, and she talked about the survey on the perception of unification by the different generations. And I think that what we have to focus on is that the necessity of unification, those who believe that unification is necessary, goes down. And also the Gen MC believes that you don't really need it or you don't need it at all. So you can see that there has been an increase from 2% to 46.9%. That is a dramatic increase. And what was discussed overall was that the negative perception towards North Korea is shown to be highest in the Gen MZ than compared to other generations. And also, more than 60% of the 20-somethings actually had this type of perception. And also, the generation, when asked about the need of unification as part of our policy, only 60% agreed among the MC generation. And also, if you look at last year's survey by the Institute of Unification Studies, do you actively support unification? Well, in 2016, actually, there was a 3.8% gap among the people who actively support and who slightly support. But you can see that this has dramatically increased to 2 digits. And also more than 60% of the MZ generation actually believe that rather than unification, they prefer peaceful coexistence. So when asking, do you prefer peaceful coexistence? And when asking unification, there was only a 3.8% gap, but among the Gen Z recently, we can see that there is a 60% gap. And so there are much more MZ generation that prefers peaceful coexistence rather than unification. So when we do unification education, we always thought about the time provided for such education and also the contents of unification, training and education. But I think that this was old school. This is a traditional approach towards unification education. I think now we need something different. We need an alternative. And through the roundtable discussion, we could see the need for this because Gen MC are really indifferent to unification. So rather than a hard approach, we need a more soft approach. And that would make it more easier for Gen MC to take interest in the topic of unification of the Korean Peninsula. And of course, I understand that the government, for example, also the local government, Seoul City and the local municipalities are thinking of many creative ways to induce the interest of the younger generation in North Korea and unification. For example, creating board games or emoticons related to North Korea. So they try to utilize the tools that are widely utilized by the younger generation. And we can see that there are efforts made by the government side, the public side, to induce interest in unification and issues related to North Korea. And this is a good approach, I know. But can this be a good long-term alternative to what we have now? So I think we have to give more thought to this, whether this is a really solid alternative approach, because these projects are focused on entertainment rather than the contents. Of course, the title itself, the title of the projects have unification in the title, but rather than unification, the focal point is on entertainment or play rather than unification. And so I think that we have to focus on the contents and start new projects. When we engage in inter-Korean exchanges, we really have to focus on the contents. We're living in an era of platforms, but now we're going into an era of content. So from the large perspective of inter-Korean broadcasting and communications, we really have to talk about the quality contents and also the soft contents that we can utilize and find a way to create such content so that we can better appeal to the younger generation and attract their interest in the issue of inter-Korean exchange and also unification. And also, we always tend to think only about the South Koreans in South Korea, but also if we think about the MZ generation, they're also the young defectors. So perhaps we can connect the young people, the diverse groups of young people, the diverse groups of MZ generations living here in Korea, because I think that we have to strengthen homogeneity, starting with inside South Korea. So we have to promote that homogeneity. If not, then we will lose the desire or the passion towards unification. So we need to have greater internal communication on this topic within South Korea as well. Thank you very much. We don't have a lot of time. The timer has turned to the color red, meaning that we don't have much time. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much for all of the comments. I am Koo Kyo-gang, working for the Northeast Asia ICT Forum. The topic of today's conference is Inter-Korean Cooperative Exchanges in Broadcasting and Communication by National Consensus. Early this year, the Ministry of Unification released a report on broadcasting and communications in the North about opening the doors to broadcasting and communication. So I would like to ask a question to Ms. Kim Hyun-kyung, who has a lot of experience in North Korean broadcast.
So if you look at the North Korean broadcast programs, because of the time constraint, I will not go into the details. But if I look around, there are concerns surrounding the opening of doors to North Korean broadcasting programs and contents because they tend to have contents for propaganda or instigation or agitation. And so even if we have a better understanding about the situation surrounding inter-Korean relations, still there are concerns about opening the doors and accepting the North Korean broadcasting contents. So in your view, is there a way, a solution to ease the concerns, to deal with this issue? And also when we do open doors to North Korean broadcasting contents, what should we be prudent about? What should we be cautious about? And also, I have a question for Professor Ha.
Professor Ha, in your presentation, you mentioned that considering the characteristics of the internet, we cannot just continue on to block North Korean citizens' access to YouTube. So then, as mentioned, if the Ministry of Unification is thinking about opening up its doors to North Korean broadcast program, do you think that it should be the same case for YouTube programs? Would it be okay to maybe listen to our speakers? Yes.
Yes, well, the Ministry of Unification, when it comes to the opening of doors to North Korean broadcasting programs, I understand that this is a core policy task. And this is an agenda that goes back 40 years. But we have not been able to come to a conclusion. It just repeats itself, and we have it as a core agenda, but we have not found a solution to this. Everything is utilized by North Korea as a tool for propaganda, because that is the reason for existence for North Korea. That is what North Korea is all about. And at least if you look at the central broadcasting organizations, just like other countries, they try to portray the fact that unless it's not unethical or about crimes, I think that we should open up, because it's not just about the inter-Korean relations, but also when we think about the borderlines of South Korea in the 21st century, it is now time to open up. So the research shows that it's difficult, it's impossible to persuade now, because when people consume media, people have their own viewpoint. And so, more than any time before, I do believe that opening the doors to broadcasting by North Korea, the impact of that would be limited compared to any other time in the past. But I think it's the methodology. How are we going to open it? up the doors, and what kind of media will be utilized, and how are we going to take care of the copyright, the IP issues, and also how are we going to deal with the technical issues. So I don't know how these issues will be solved, but in my personal viewpoint, I think that as long as the government, the state does not block the broadcasting contents of North Korea, it would be I think that it would be good for the consumers to decide whether they will consume or not. Thank you.
네.
Yes, Professor Ha. Thank you. It's something that I've been looking into for quite a long period of time. In addition to YouTube, there's also social media and even Telegram. We can see that such media is now making inroads into the North. And as was indicated in the presentation, we do believe that the North was trying to open up personal accounts because most of their accounts have been closed down. So at I know that it's being closed down by the censor committee. But whether it be publications, I think that at the end of the day, it also has to do with having access to the internet and to various programs. And we need to find a way to introduce some realistic solutions. And in terms of the country's strategic approach, I think that it's something that is something that needs the attention of the government. There's a lot of forums at the National Assembly and also at the Human Rights Committee. In accordance to Article 7 of the Constitution, I know that there has been related legal proceedings on this. And because it's now on the tabled agenda of the Ministry of Unification, I think that we really need to find a way to realistically approach this and find the solution rather than just making it hollow words. In the beginning of the panel discussion, I've mentioned that the citizens of East Germany has been saying that they've been living and trapped in 30 years of Western German value. And with their income levels brought up to about 80% of that of the West, it seems like they're witnessing an identity crisis. In other words, it has led them to have this sense of loss. And I think that if we really want to overcome hatred, we do need to address any false information. And in addition to that, the citizens need to have access to that information directly so that they can make that judgment. So broadcasting communications and exchanges, it's something that we can do, and it's something that citizens can take part in. So I think that we really need to offer more credit and trust to the citizens because they are smart and wise group of people, and we really need to entrust them with more credibility so that they can make their own judgment with access to information. Thank you very much for all of the comments. And Mr. Lee, do you have any concluding remarks? No, I just want to mention thank you for this opportunity to speak. I thought that you really had a burning comments, but yes, thank you very much for that. So once again, thank you to all of our panelists. And with that, let us conclude the panel discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much. This concludes the 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications. And once again, thank you very much for all of the contributions. During the panel discussion, we were able to listen to the insightful comments of all of our experts. The conference was on Inter-Korean Cooperative Exchanges in Broadcasting Communication by National Consensus. I would like to once again thank all of the experts for their insightful implications, and thank you all for sharing your experience. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists, and I would also like to extend my gratitude to the audience for their active participation. And thank you all to the viewers. Did you all enjoy today's conference? We hope that the two Koreas can continue on with the exchange based on broadcasting and communication, which will help us instill peace on the Korean Peninsula. Once again, thank you very much, and we would like to conclude 2022 International Conference on Inter-Korean Broadcasting and Communications. But of course, there's one more thing that I would like to add. We have a satisfaction survey for all of our audience, so please give us your feedback so that we can prepare an even better event next time. There is a QR code on the screen, so please scan this QR code, which will lead you to the satisfaction survey link. So please take part in the survey, and we also have a token of appreciation for those that took part in the survey. Thank you very much, and we would now like to conclude the conference, and we would like to see you back next year. Thank you very much.